Chapter 438. A few disciples from the Nine Blades sect tied the Death Toad and Lin Yuan to their horses, and left under the cover of the night. Along the way, everyone looked at these two people from time to time. If they were killed, the Death Toad would be finished. If they were to make a move now, no one would know. That person from the Yin Nation would probably not care about such a small matter. I'm afraid there will be a war in the future. At least the two of them are a fighting force. In the end, the Earthwheel Elder whose face was scratched by Lin Xiao sighed, and everyone gave up on this idea. In the wilderness on both sides of the road, a man and a woman hid in the dark and watched this group of people pass by with suspicious expressions. How did that coward Lin Yuan end up in the hands of the Nine Blades sect? A woman asked in a languid voice. Are they chasing after the two people you mentioned? The man asked. Most likely, but the situation is a little strange. Are we still going? I'm afraid there's a problem. Go back and find out where the two people from the Nine Blades sect went. After daybreak, Renbaqian and the others headed toward the Golden Ring residence. It would normally take 4 days to travel from Longzhou City to Jisai City, but it took them 5 days. Along the way, Renbaqian obtained a lot of useful information from the two people from the Nine Blades sect. They knew a lot more than what Renbaqian had inquired about previously. After all, there were many things that these sects knew, but ordinary people didn't. The division of power in Tianjing Basin was much more complicated than what he knew from Xiwanya. There were more than a dozen powers and hundreds of sects, big and small. Their relationships were intricate and chaotic. However, there was also an alliance behind them that had been contacting all sides to prepare for an uprising. This alliance was led by 3 major powers and 8 major sections. Among them, the 3 major factions were the 3 biggest factions in Tianjing Basin, and they controlled almost all the cities in Tianjing Basin. They were the North Alliance, the Southern Metropolis, and the Green Bellflower. Among them, the North Alliance was the most powerful, followed by the Southern Metropolis, and the Green Bellflower was the smallest. However, the internal structure of these 3 powers was also complicated. One of the 8 major sects was the Golden Ring residence. Its sphere of influence covered 6 cities, not the 3 that Renbaqian had heard before. The Golden Ring residence was the smallest of the 8 major sections. The largest one was called the Spiritual Mountain sect. It was the largest sect in the Northern Alliance. Its sphere of influence encompassed close to 20 cities. Many of the generals in the Northern Alliance came from the Spiritual Mountain sect. In addition, among these 8 big sects, there was one that Renbaqian found rather interesting. It was called the Mengxing Pavilion, and it was located within the territory of the Green Bellflower. It was said that all the members of the pavilion were women, and one of the pavilion masters was called Qingling. From this name, one could guess the relationship between the two parties. Along the way, Renbaqian felt more than once that these two people from the Nine Blades sect were really stupid. They didn't even have the slightest bit of suspicion towards him. They didn't even know his exact identity before telling him everything they knew. However, thinking about it, it was probably because the ancient race had never had any outsiders before. The ancient race and the other races were mutually exclusive. The two of them had never doubted that they would stand on the side of the ancient race. In addition, they were too desperate for outside support. They wanted to get out of this cage and take back their original land. At the thought of this, he felt that they were rather pitiful. Although he was pitiful, he could not pity him. There was no right or wrong between the two sides. It was just that their positions were different, and they were enemies. After walking like this for 5 days, everyone finally arrived at GCI City, where the Golden Ring residence was located. After arriving, everyone first found an inn. The Earthwheel experts from the Nine Blades sect went to the Golden Ring residence to deliver the visiting card, while Renbaqian took Lin Xiao for a stroll in GCI City. GCI City was much bigger and more prosperous than Longzhou City. The streets were considered well organized. The lives of the ordinary people here were slightly better than in Longzhou City. At the very least, they looked better. Their clothes were still very old, but they were considered clean and didn't have many patches. However, they were only slightly better off. The ordinary people were still considered sallow and emaciated. In general, after visiting these 2 cities, Renbachian roughly understood the living conditions of the remnant citizens of the Hao nation. Poverty had always surrounded them, and having a full stomach was probably their biggest wish. In addition, what attracted Renbachian was the various shops on both sides of the street. Whether it was daily necessities like salt or cloth, the prices here were 50% higher than in Lan City. In addition to those common shops, there were also many unique shops. For example, a bone grinder shop specialized in sharpening bone knives, arrowheads, and other weapons. Renbachian specially went in for a walk and finally bought a bone knife. This kind of bone knife had a very sharp edge, and was almost as sharp as an iron knife. Its biggest flaw was its hardness and toughness, which couldn't be compared to iron products. If it were to be chopped by an iron knife, cracks would appear after a few hits. Some bones had good toughness and hardness, and could be made into knives that could be used for a long time. However, these were very expensive and weren't affordable for ordinary people. Is that the disciple of the Golden Ring residence? Renbachian raised his chin at the back of a figure in the crowd in the distance. From where he stood, he could see the other party. He was carrying a long bone knife with a row of 9 golden rings on the back of it. When walking, the golden rings would make a crisp sound when they hit the back of the bone knife. Previously, Renbachian had heard from them that these golden rings were made using a special method. When wielding the bone knife, these golden rings would make an ear-piercing sound that would interfere with the other party's 5 senses, and easily make the other party impatient. If one were to fight with a disciple of the Golden Ring residence under the sun, not only would one have to be careful of being disturbed by these golden rings, but they would also have to be careful of the reflection of the light. The Golden Ring residence had a unique technique. When wielding the knife, these golden rings would reflect the sunlight and form countless light fragments that would interfere with the other party's vision. With their ears and eyes disrupted by light, it would be difficult for even a level 1 Golden Ring residence disciple to deal with them. Yes, sir. The Nine-Blades sect disciple replied. The Nine-Blades sect disciple replied. This person's name was Lu Xing, and the Earthwheel elder was called Lu Changmei. While Renbachian was strolling around the city, the Empress was sitting in the garden in a daze. Without that person by her side, these days were getting more and more boring. She wasn't even interested in watching television. Sure enough, it was more interesting when he was around. In the past, she had always been alone and didn't feel anything. However, after having someone by her side, it was especially easy to feel lonely. Has there been any news from him? The Empress asked without raising her head. Your Majesty, Sir Ren didn't bring the radio with him this time. Qing Yuan whispered behind her. After that, she turned her head and stuck out her tongue at Hong Yuan. Her eyes were full of smiles as she thought, Sir Ren has only been gone for a few days and Her Majesty already misses him. The Empress sat for a long time before getting up and walking to the candy tree. The candy on the tree was already 1/3 gone. At that time, Renbachian had solemnly vowed that he would return after finishing the candy. The Empress picked up a pair of scissors and cut off another piece of candy. When she looked again, there was only half of it left. If he doesn't return after finishing the candy, I will tie him up and hang him on the tree. The Empress raised her eyebrows and thought to herself. She heard that there were 23 ways to tie someone up. She could try all of them. Chapter 439. When Renbachian returned to the inn, he saw a few short-legged horses at the entrance, and a few disciples of the Golden Ring sect with bone knives on their backs standing there. The surrounding pedestrians carefully avoided them, and didn't dare to approach. The bustling street highlighted these people. The Golden Ring residence was extremely powerful locally. Even the warlord of Thorn City had to be courteous to them, let alone ordinary people who naturally stayed far away. Upon seeing Renbachian and Lin Xiaola, they sized them up, and one of the disciples cupped his hands and asked, Are you sir from the Yun nation? Yes. Renbachian nodded. Our elder is waiting for you in the inn. The disciple said respectfully. Renbachian nodded and strode into the inn. Someone inside had already heard the commotion outside. He walked out with large strides and said in a clear voice, Young master, you must be from the Yun nation. It must have been a long journey. Renbachian looked up. It was a man of about 40 years old. He was thin, had sharp eyebrows, a gentle attitude, and exuded a steady charm. On Earth, even if he was 40 years old, there would be plenty of women who would fight for him. He was only slightly less handsome than Renbaqian. I'm Ling Ziquan, an elder of the Golden Ring residence in charge of external affairs. Greetings, sir. There's no need for formalities. You should be clear about my purpose for coming here, Renbaqian said faintly. I've heard a little about it. This isn't a place to entertain guests, and we have neglected you by staying here. Arrangements have been made, so please move over and let the Golden Ring residents play the host, Ling Ziquan said with a smile. All right. Renbaqian nodded slightly. He knew that entering the Golden Ring residence was just the beginning. Although this person's attitude was respectful, it wasn't as respectful as the people from the Nine Blades sect. After all, this was the difference between a large and a small sect, and he reckoned that it wouldn't be as easy to fool as the people from the Nine Blades sect. He had to pass the test of the Golden Ring residence before he could come into contact with more things. If he was exposed, he was afraid that Lin Xiaolo would have to escape with him. One had to know that there was a spirit will expert in the Golden Ring residence. There were a total of 13 famous spirit will experts in the entire Tianjing Basin. Each of the 8 major sects had one, and the largest sect, Lingshan, had 2. However, even though there were 13 spirit will experts, these remnant citizens of the Hao Nation still didn't dare to act rashly. At the same level, the aboriginal experts who had reached the cardinal heaven level were too terrifying, and the spirit will experts in Tianjing Basin could only rank in the bottom half of the spirit will experts. Previously, when Great Xia attacked Ziyue City, 7 spirit will experts besieged Xiongyu, the deputy protector general of the Protectorate of the North. Xiongyu died, and 2 of Great Xia's spirit will experts died in battle. The protector general of the south, Shiwanya, was stronger than Xiongyu. Together with the other 2 cardinal heaven experts, the 13 spirit will experts didn't dare to act rashly. As a result, these remnant citizens of the Hao Nation needed weapons and spirit will experts for external support. Renbaqian was now a citizen of the Yun Nation, and had a spirit will expert as his bodyguard. As such, he was naturally treated with the highest level of respect. Everyone left the city and headed towards the most eye-catching mountain peak in the northwest direction. When they got closer, they saw that there were layers of pavilions and pavilions from the foot of the mountain to the waist of the mountain. The buildings were vaguely visible among the trees. Although the Golden Ring residence was a sect, its location was the size of a small town. When they got closer, they could see a mountain gate in front of them. On both sides, there were stone walls that were 3 meters tall that enclosed the entire Golden Ring residence. Only the eaves were exposed. In front of the mountain gate, 4 disciples stood on both sides. They were all wearing yellow shirts and brown pleated skirts with bone knives on their backs. A group of people hurriedly walked out of the mountain gate and welcomed Renbaqian and the others. First, they exchanged conventional greetings. The person who came was the chief of the Golden Ring residence, Zhang Chongkong. He looked to be around 60 years old, and had a dignified appearance. Behind him was his wife, who looked to be in her early 30s. She had a graceful figure, and was extremely beautiful. However, Renbaqian had heard from the people of the Nine Blades sect about some famous characters in the Golden Ring residence. He knew that this person was already over 40 years old, and was a famous beauty when she was young. She was known as the Painting Fairy, and it was said that her painting skills were superb. In addition to the 2 of them, there were also the 2 inner deacons, the law enforcement deacon, and the outer deacon beside him. Out of the 6 deacons in the residence, 4 appeared. After all, Renbaqian was an envoy from the Yun Nation, and they had no choice but to treat him seriously. Even without mentioning Renbaqian's identity, Lin Xiaolo's strength as a spirit will expert was enough for them to treat her this way. Young master, you have another companion. Is she in the carriage? After the conventional greetings, Zhang Chongkong asked. He was still very curious about this spirit will expert. He heard that this person was only a young lady, but she was already at the spirit will level. He was afraid that there would be another person like Qi Zixiao and Li Yuanzhu in the future. Renbaqian turned his head and opened the curtains. Indeed, Lin Xiaolo was sleeping soundly inside. She had really let go of herself during these 2 trips with him. She was even more so than when she was in Qingxin Palace Hall. Ren Baqian didn't say anything. He took out a piece of milk candy and threw it into his mouth. After chewing it twice, he blew on Lin Xiaola. Then Lin Xiaola lay there with her eyes closed, sniffled, and swam toward him. Looking at her salted posture, Ren Baqian really wanted to take off his shoes and stretch out his feet without saying anything. If he remembered correctly, Lin Xiaola's sense of smell was much more sensitive than that of ordinary people. However, it was a little inhumane to do so, so he eventually gave up on this tempting idea. It was mainly because Ren Baqian was afraid that she would scratch him out of anger. Count to 3. Otherwise, I will throw this candy away. Ren Baqian took out a piece of candy and slowly unwrapped it. 3. Ren Baqian turned around and threw the candy into the distance. A gust of wind blew past Ren Baqian. Lin Xiaola appeared in the air, grabbed the white rabbit creamy candy, threw it into her mouth, and questioned him. What about 1 and 2? Do you even know how to count? Ren Baqian felt that it was really embarrassing to be questioned by someone from Dayo like this. Everyone looked at Ren Baqian teasing the spirit wheel expert like he was teasing a pet. They couldn't believe that this was the spirit wheel expert. However, when she came out of the carriage to catch the candy, she displayed her agility and speed. Everyone had to admit that she was indeed a spirit wheel expert. In everyone's impression, spirit wheel experts were either dignified, arrogant, or otherworldly. At least, this was what they knew. For example, it was rare to see the great elder in the sect even once a month. Most of the time, he would only practice hard in the mountains or climb over the cliffs around the basin to search for medicinal herbs. Every time they met, he would only say a few words. In their minds, this was how a spirit wheel expert should be. Lin Xiaola was too different from the spirit wheel experts that they knew. However, after carefully sizing her up, she looked to be about 16 or 17 years old. Her body hadn't matured yet, her hair was tied up in a simple bun, and her face was delicate and pretty. In a few years, she might even become a beauty. She was wearing a silk tube top and a short skirt, which was somewhat similar to how the Aboriginals dressed. However, perhaps this was the current trend in the Yun Nation? After taking a closer look at Lin Xiaola's appearance, everyone suffered another blow. Thinking about how they were already so old and hadn't even crossed the path to heaven, they felt that they had wasted their years. They had to admit that there were indeed geniuses in this world. I'm Zhan Chongkong. Please. Zhan Chongkong sorted out his emotions and introduced himself. Seeing that Lin Xiaola didn't seem to care, he gestured to Ren Baqian. Ren Baqian and Zhan Chongkong walked side by side while Lin Xiaola stared at the bag of candy hanging from Ren Baqian's neck. Her gaze swayed along with the candy bag. Painting Fairy wanted to chat with her, but she didn't know her temperament. Seeing that her attention was focused on the person in front of her, she gave up on the idea. However, she thought to herself that she didn't know what was so special about this man from the Yun Nation, that such a genius would favor him so much that she couldn't bear to let go of him. If Ren Baqian knew what she was thinking, he would laugh like crazy. Chapter 440. Where are you two from? How should I address you? Wang Jing, my surname is Yi. Call me Yi Yunxian. Ren Baqian made up a random name. He didn't know much about the Yun Nation, and only knew of 2 places. One was the capital of the Yun Nation, Wangjing, and the other was Qingfeng City. As for the culprit, she only knew of one person, Yi Ku, the warlord of Qingfeng City. That fellow had the audacity to rob her of a batch of silver. And the Empress had already arranged for his entire family to be exterminated. After all, he was only pretending to be a Yun Nation merchant at the beginning. He didn't do much research on the various aspects of the Yun Nation. He didn't expect that a freak combination of factors would lead to the current situation. Wild Cloud Immortal, overflowing with immortal chi. What a good name. Painting Fairy praised. Previously, the 2 of you from the Nine Blades sect did not speak in detail. I wonder if Mr. Yi could tell us the detailed purpose of your visit? External Warden Ling Ziquan asked. His question was also what everyone wanted to ask. This was what everyone wanted to know the most at the moment. At this moment, everyone was in the middle of the banquet. 17 glowing pearls hung in the air. The light was very good and soft, not dazzling at all. It was also not as oppressive as the lamps. The entire hall was brightly lit. Renbachyan looked at it enviously. This wasn't an ordinary night-luminescent pearl. Night-luminescent pearls weren't this bright. This thing was almost as bright as a 40-watt light bulb. It could definitely be considered a treasure. At the highest table were Zhang Changkong and Painting Fairy. Slightly below them were Renbachyan and Lin Xiaola. Further below them were the two people from the Nine Blades sect. Opposite him were the 6 great deacons of the Golden Ring residence. At this time, he finally saw all of them. We have the same enemy. As he spoke, he glanced at Lin Xiaola from the corner of his eye and saw that she was setting up a tower. She piled up the candies that Renbachyan had just given her, took out a piece from the pile, and scattered it all over the place. Everyone nodded in agreement. The aboriginals were indeed their common enemy. They occupied your homes and forced you to live and reproduce in such a place. Most of you will never be able to take a step out of here. Like a bird in a cage. A mournful look appeared on everyone's face. Renbachyan's words struck a chord in their hearts. No one was willing to be kept like a caged bird here. Even if this place was so big that most ordinary people wouldn't be able to walk around it in their entire lives. That did not hide the fact that they were being held here. The vast and boundless world outside was what they yearned for. This is the best chance you've had in years. Dayo has just had a war with Great Xia and is now at war with us. They have almost no time to care about other things. If you launch an attack at this time, they will be attacked from the front and rear, and will definitely be in chaos. With us restraining the northeastern forces, the pressure on you will be the least. In the north, there was still Great Xia. Presumably they would not sit idly by. At that time, there would be wars everywhere, and they would definitely not be able to hold on. This is your best chance to leave this place and take back your original land. Renbachyan spoke very slowly. Even though he was talking about something that everyone already knew, it struck a chord in everyone's heart, because everyone was thinking the same thing. Wasn't this the reason why the people from Great Xia came? This was indeed the best opportunity in 70 years. If he wanted to wait for another opportunity, who knew how long it would take? How many years would it take? We are aware of this matter as well. However, it wasn't just empty talk if he wanted to start a war. I wonder if you can give us some help? Zhang Changkong asked bluntly. Both parties had the same goal, so there was no need to probe each other. What he wanted was to get to the point as soon as possible. 20,000 spear tips and 5,000 swords. Of course, these aren't free gifts, Renbachyan said faintly. What are your conditions? You need to start a war as soon as possible, preferably within 3 months. In addition, there are some things that I'm afraid you can't decide on, Renbachyan said. Even though everything was fake, the conditions still had to be stated. The harsher the conditions, the easier it would be for the other party to believe them. If he didn't state any conditions, there might be some loopholes. Many times, people were strange. On one hand, they hoped that others would be more generous to them. On the other hand, when the other party was really generous, they would become suspicious. We aren't ready yet, Zhang Changkong said. Time flies. By the time you are ready, Dayo will be ready too. According to the information I received, they are already training new soldiers. How many? Zhang Changkong quickly asked. 40,000. As soon as he said this, the room suddenly became quiet. 40,000 soldiers wouldn't be able to do much in either Great Xia or the Yun nation. But if it were 40,000 ancient race soldiers, that wouldn't be a small number. There was silence in the room. Renbachyan looked down while the others pondered in silence. This matter is too big and doesn't involve the Golden Ring residents alone. We will discuss it later. Mr. Yi, why don't you meet the higher-ups of our alliance and discuss this in detail? This matter wasn't something that the Golden Ring residents could decide. Zhang Changkong thought about it and put this matter aside. It was enough for him and the others to know the purpose of this person, and some other information. The rest would be left to others. When can I meet the higher-ups of your alliance? Renbachyan asked. I don't have much time to waste here. Mr. Yi, you must be tired from the long journey. After tonight's banquet, we will send someone to send you there tomorrow. The journey will take 8 to 9 days. Let's toast to Mr. Yi first. No matter what, you are our friend. Zhang Chongkong raised his wine cup and toasted him from afar. Cheers. Ren Baqian drank it in one gulp. His eyes moved slightly. The taste of this wine was unexpectedly good. Even though the alcohol content wasn't high, it was sweet and palatable. There was also a kind of plant fragrance. After drinking this cup of wine, he felt refreshed and the tiredness from the continuous days of travel had dissipated. Mr. Yi should have never drunk this wine before. After brewing, this wine has to be stored in the trunk of a hanging tree for a year before being sealed in a mud jar for 3 years. The wine that Mr. Yi drinks is produced from a 1,000-year-old hanging tree. Every year, less than 50 liters are brewed. Even I can't bear to drink it. Indeed, it's not bad. Ren Baqian nodded. He finally found a good point about the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. This wine was brewed rather well. In the future, he could gather a group of people to specialize in brewing wine. Come. Zhang Chongkong clapped his hands again. 16 young girls around 16 years old entered the hall. 8 of them held musical instruments and stood at the side. The other 8 girls held ribbons in their hands and danced in the room. As the girls danced, their graceful figures were faintly discernible under the light muslin. Their ribbons fluttered in the air, attracting Ren Baqian's attention. He had to admit that the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation were much better than the aboriginals in this aspect. The dance of the aboriginals was full of primitive wildness. Even though it was interesting to watch it occasionally, it wasn't as suitable and aesthetically pleasing as the dance of the young girls in the hall. In particular, one of the young girls exuded the vitality of a young girl from head to toe. Her skin was fair, her appearance was excellent, and every frown and smile was extremely attractive. Compared to the 2 outstanding girls that he had seen in this world, her appearance wasn't inferior at all. The most attractive thing was her eyes. They were clear and full of curiosity, as if she was a young girl who didn't know about the world. Ren Baqian found a second good point about the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. When the time comes, he could gather a group of them and dance in the palace when he had nothing to do. Well, he also had to get those 17 pearls on his head back. Zhang Chongkong paid attention to Ren Baqian's expression. Seeing that Ren Baqian was fond of them, he smiled and said, "If Mr. Yi likes them, I can make the decision to gift them to you. I only hope that you will treat them well in the future." Residence Chief? The rest of the people were immediately shocked. The rest of the 8 girls didn't matter, but one of them was the residence chief's youngest daughter. She was usually treated like a treasure by the residence chief. She actually appeared among these people. This was enough to shock everyone. However, Zhang Chongkong's words were even more shocking. Everyone looked at Painting Fairy, but realized that she didn't seem to have heard anything. Zhang Chongkong looked at Ren Baqian with a smile in his eyes. There was also a tinge of anticipation in his eyes. He thought to himself, no matter what, there will be a battle in the future. If they won, it would be fine. If they lost, I'm afraid that not many people would survive. In particular, Dayo wouldn't let people like the Golden Ring residents stay. Even though sending Kaisian away didn't sound good, it was an opportunity for her. Even if she lost, she could still survive. Chapter 441. After hearing Zhang Chongkong's words, it would be a lie if Ren Baqian said he wasn't moved. He didn't care about the rest, except for the girl. Not only was she beautiful, but her eyes were also as clear and transparent as a lake. There was also the innocence in her eyes, as well as the curiosity of a baby. To men, this was a fatal temptation, and they wanted to protect that innocence. However, thinking about the Empress who was still waiting for him to feed her and his identity, Ren Baqian shook his head and said, "Thank you for your kindness, but I appreciate it." "Why? You don't like her?" Zhang Chongkong couldn't help but ask. At this moment, his mood was extremely complicated. If Ren Baqian accepted directly, he would be worried. But if he rejected it, he would be unhappy. How could he reject his own daughter? Was this person blind? "I'm here to form an alliance and have no interest in anything else." Ren Baqian still rejected. After he rejected, he realized that those attendants were relieved, but Zhang Chongkong was very unhappy. This made him wonder if Zhang Changkong really liked to give away his daughter. Also, why did those attendants feel relieved? Just now you even said something to stop me. Could it be that your lover is inside? As the dance ended, these women left one after another. Rin Baqian felt a little regretful because those eyes were really unforgettable. At night, when Ren Baqian went back to rest, Zhang Changkong and Painting Fairy returned to their room. Are you really in such a hurry? Aren't you afraid of entrusting her to the wrong person? Painting Fairy asked after entering the room. Previously, she acted as if she didn't hear anything, but now that she was back, she immediately spoke. It was obvious that she wasn't calm. Although you mentioned this before, I didn't expect you to be so anxious. We just met, and you don't even know his temperament. You actually want to entrust Xiener to him. Time waits for no man. Qi Zixiao has already arrived in Gu City. At this time, she isn't in Lan City, but is here. It's hard to predict her intentions. Zhang Changkong sighed. What? Painting Fairy was shocked when she heard this. Everyone in the entire Tianjing Basin feared and hated that famous woman. Is this true? It can't be wrong, Zhang Changkong said. Therefore, even if I don't understand this person, I can't care too much. If there are unforeseen circumstances, it will be too late to consider this matter. Moreover, Deyo wasn't scary. What was terrifying was the endless number of barbarians in the 60,000 mountains. Even if they managed to get out of the valley, he did not know if they would be able to chase the barbarians back and block their counterattack. He did not know how many people would die and how many would survive. What's more, Kaisian is too pure. If something happens to us, I'm afraid that she will suffer a lot in the future. Since that was the case, he might as well find a backer. We don't have that much time and opportunity to slowly choose, Zhang Changkong said after a pause. Under normal circumstances, his daughter's looks would naturally be the target of countless pursuers. But in times of chaos, it became her disaster. In addition, she was innocent and ignorant of worldly affairs. Whether or not she could protect herself in this chaotic world was truly worrying. Rather than that, it was better to find a backer. No matter how bad it was, it wouldn't be that bad. After listening to Zhang Changkong's words, a complicated expression appeared on Painting Fairy's face. Although she was reluctant, she didn't speak anymore. What now? Tomorrow, the mansion will send someone to send him to Heavenly Cloud Mountain, and have Kaisian go with him. With Kaisian's talent, looks, and temperament, no man will not be tempted after interacting with her for a few days, Zhang Changkong said with a complicated expression. After a long time, Painting Fairy sighed, got up and left the room. The next morning, Ren Baqian woke Lin Xiaola up after washing his face. In order to keep her awake, he played a little game with her. He threw the candy to the left, and Lin Xiaola appeared in the air like a gust of wind. Then Ren Baqian took out another candy and threw it to the right. After catching 5 or 6 candies, Lin Xiaola couldn't help but say faintly, "Why do I feel that something isn't right? You eat and sleep every day. You will get fat and your body will rust. You need to exercise." Ren Baqian threw a candy behind him, and Lin Xiaola immediately disappeared from his sight. Cough cough. Ling Ziquan, who had been standing in front of the courtyard for a long time, didn't know how to react. Finally he coughed. "Mr. Yi, please have breakfast." Following Ling Ziquan's words, a few maids brought their breakfast to the courtyard. "If there's anything you don't like, just tell me. When do we set off?" Ren Baqian asked. "We can set off after breakfast." After breakfast, Ren Baqian packed up his things and waited for someone to call them. After about 2 hours, Ren Baqian was a little impatient when Ling Ziquan finally arrived. "Mr. Yi, everything has been arranged. Please follow me." As Ling Ziquan walked out, they realized that they were on the way to the mountain gate. When they were near the gate, they saw a large group of people in the distance. "Mr. Yi, I have already arranged for someone to bring you there. There will be someone to take care of things along the way, so you don't have to worry." Zhang Changkong turned around and cupped his hands when he saw Ren Baqian. "Thank you." Ren Baqian cupped his hands. Then the crowd split into 2. In front of them were 6 horses and a rather gorgeous carriage, as well as the ox cart that Ren Baqian came with. "Mr. Yi, let's cut to the chase. We will meet again in the future," Let's drink and chat merrily when we meet again. Zhang Changkong cupped his hands. Let's meet again. Ren Baqian cupped his hands, thinking that when they met again, they would probably want to swallow him alive. Since that was the case, it was better not to meet again. At least after staying at the Golden Ring sect for a night, he didn't have a bad impression of this place. Unfortunately, they were on different sides and were destined to be enemies. There was nothing much to say. Let's meet again. Everyone cupped their hands. Ren Baqian looked at the two carriages in front of him. Seeing that no one wanted him to get on the carriage, he got on his own ox cart. Then 8 people came out from the crowd and got on their horses. 2 of them were responsible for driving the carriage. One of them was the elder in charge of external affairs, Ling Ziquan. As for the 2 people from the Nine Blades sect, he didn't see them. Mr. Yi, just let me know if anything happens along the way. Ling Ziquan smiled at Ren Baqian as he sat on the horse. His smile was complicated. Ren Baqian nodded, turned his head, nodded at Zhang Changkong and the rest, and entered the ox cart. When the ox cart started its journey, Ren Baqian began to ponder about the carriage behind. When he first saw it, he thought it was prepared for the 2 of them. He didn't expect it to be completely different, which made him feel a little strange. Could it be that there was something on this carriage? Ren Baqian's mind raced. Could it be that the dancers from yesterday were on it? He didn't know if that woman was among them. However, even if there was, he wouldn't dare to accept them. If he did, the Empress would skin him and hang him on the city wall to dry him like bacon. He was very clear about the Empress's temperament. If he went to a brothel to drink in Lan City, as long as he didn't go overboard, the Empress might turn a blind eye. Moreover, there was Tong Jinya, the old bastard, to take the blame for him. The Empress seemed to be more interested in beating him up. However, if he wanted to keep a mistress in his golden house, Ren Baqian thought for a while and didn't think too much about it. At most, he would ask Ling Ziquan to bring her back when they reached the destination. Whoever wanted her could have her, but he didn't dare to. They traveled all the way until noon, when everyone stopped to take a break. Ren Baqian had been paying attention to the movements of the carriage. Sure enough, when the carriage stopped, a hand reached out to the side and pulled open the curtain. A girl's face appeared from behind the curtain. It's really her, Ren Baqian thought. It was the girl from last night, whose eyes were as clear as the bottom of a lake, and who gave people the feeling that she was ignorant of worldly affairs. At this moment, she was wearing a light green dress and had her hair combed into a young girl's bun. Compared to yesterday, she looked more lively. Mr. Yi, father asked me to send you to Mount Tianyan. That girl imitated others and cupped her hands at Ren Baqian, following which, she grinned innocently. Your father? Is he? Ren Baqian immediately caught this word. 3rd Mississippi, Ling Ziquan nodded at the girl and said to Ren Baqian, she is the youngest daughter of the chief. This time, she will accompany me to send Mr. Yi to Mount Tianyan. Ren Baqian looked at that girl and couldn't wrap his head around it. Yesterday, Zhang Changkong almost gave those dancers to him, right? Didn't that include her? Or did he misunderstand something? He must have misunderstood something. Yesterday, she shouldn't have been included. It was just the others. However, that didn't make much sense. The other girls from last night could only be said to be good-looking, nothing more. For Ren Baqian, who was used to seeing the Empress and Li Yuanju, they weren't attractive at all. Compared to the flat-chested girl, Lin Qiala, she was a little inferior. He really didn't expect that the chief of the Golden Ring residence would actually let his own daughter dance. Ren Baqian pondered, and felt that he might have misunderstood yesterday. Chapter 442. Mr. Yi, is it very big outside? Mr. Yi, how big is it outside? Mr. Yi, have you seen the sea before? What does the sea look like? What color is it? I read that there are no boundaries. Is that true? Mr. Yi. Since noon, Ren Baqian had been hearing Mr. Yi in questions. Ren Baqian couldn't help but ask, are you 100,000 wise? Although Ren Baqian said this, he didn't feel annoyed. This girl had a special quality that made it hard for people to hate her. Even if she asked some very childish questions, it would only make people feel that this was how she should be. What is 100,000 whys? Rinpoche was speechless. You will know when you see it with your own eyes in the future. It's better to see it with your own eyes than to hear it from others, Rinpoche replied. He had never seen the sea in this world. What if he said it was blue, but it was actually red, yellow, green, or black? There was also the Red Sea and the Black Sea on Earth. Although he had never been there, and didn't know if they were really red or black, at least some parts of the Yellow Sea were indeed yellow, mainly because there was too much sand in the water and the seawater was turbid. I don't know when I can go out and take a look. Speaking of going out, Zhang Kaixian was a little distracted. She hadn't even gone far before, and the furthest she went was when she went to Mount Tianyin with her father. As for Tianjing Basin, she knew from a very young age that she couldn't go out because it was full of ferocious barbarians. Her father and the uncles in the residence all hated the barbarians. She was imperceptibly influenced from a young age, so she didn't hate the barbarians. She just wanted to go out and take a look. She heard that the outside world was very big and beautiful, even more beautiful than the Golden Ring residence. Zhang Kaixian was in a daze for a moment. Rinpoche looked at the side of her face before shifting his gaze elsewhere. Zhang Kaixian had the characteristics of immigrants from the Hao Nation. Her forehead was very wide. Her facial features weren't very exquisite, and her mouth was a little big. However, her facial features were just right on her face, giving people a breathtaking feeling. No matter who saw her, their first reaction would be that she was beautiful. Rinpoche didn't mind admiring her beauty, but he didn't want to get too close to her. Mr. Yi, is the Yun Nation very big? I heard them say that it's very prosperous. Even more prosperous than Jiasai City? Zhang Kaixian only stayed quiet for a while before turning her attention to a new problem. After Zhang Kaixian asked a bunch of questions, she suddenly stopped and stared in one direction. After a few minutes, she ran over happily. Rinpoche was a little astonished at first. He looked at her and realized that she was chasing a butterfly. A journey that would normally take 8 to 9 days had taken Rinpoche and his group 12 days. On 2 of those days, Rinpoche returned to Earth. And there were other times when Zhang Kaixian chased butterflies and other insects far away. Even though Rinpoche tried his best to avoid it, he still became familiar with the girl named Zhang Kaixian after 12 days. After all, she was the kind of girl that was hard to guard against and hated. Even if they knew that they were enemies, they would gradually accept her. Even Lin Xiaola was very familiar with her. However, being familiar didn't mean that their relationship was good. On the contrary, there was a reason why their relationship wasn't so good. It happened on a sunny afternoon. When the flower fades, the green apricot grows small. When swallows fly, green water and people circle. The willows on the branches bloom less and less. There are plenty of fish in the sea. A swing on the wall and a path on the other side. Passers-by outside the wall, while the beauty on the wall laughs. The laughter gradually subsides, and the sound gradually dies down. Amorous feelings are annoyed by heartless feelings. Rinpoche pulled open the curtain of the carriage and looked inside. He saw Zhang Kaixian poking her head out to look at the road on both sides. She was singing a song with a happy expression on her face. Zhang Kaixian's face was filled with joy. In fact, she was always happy. These days, Rinpoche saw happiness, cheerfulness, and vitality in her every day. It was as if the word worry didn't exist for her. The people who were traveling with her looked at her with doting eyes. Her cheerfulness also infected the others, and even the journey wasn't so boring. Let's take a break, Rinpoche said to the driver as he stretched. After a while, the entire group stopped by the roadside. Next to them was a stretch of farmland. There were farmers doing farm work, and there were also children running on the small paths between the fields. The group stopped, and everyone dismounted from their horses to stretch their muscles. Mr. Yi, what kind of clothes do people wear in the Yun Nation? Is it the kind you wear? Zhang Kaixian jumped off the carriage, ran to Rinpoche's side, and continued to ask questions. However, after a few minutes, she saw a butterfly in the distance and ran over happily. Rinpoche felt that she probably knew martial arts, which could be seen from the way she got off the carriage. However, when she chased after the butterfly, she acted like an ordinary person. She didn't reveal any martial arts, and her movements were a little clumsy. After a while, Zhang Kaixian ran back from a distance with a big blue butterfly in her hands. She was very careful, afraid that she would damage the butterfly. Every time she got off the carriage, she couldn't help but catch the butterfly when she saw it. However, when she left, she would release the butterfly. Look, it's so beautiful. Zhang Kaixian ran to Renbaqian's side and held the butterfly with both hands for him to take a look. Very beautiful, Renbaqian echoed. Zhang Kaixian ran to Lin Xiaola's side and said, Sister Lin, look. Oh, it's so beautiful. A gust of wind blew, and Zhang Kaixian's hands became empty. Oh, it's not very delicious. Lin Xiaola smacked her lips and said with some regret. Zhang Kaixian was stunned. She opened her mouth wide and couldn't say a word for a long time. After a while, she realized that her butterfly had been swallowed by Lin Xiaola and quickly ran back to the carriage. Did you do it on purpose? Renbaqian watched her run back to the carriage before walking to Lin Xiaola's side and asking casually, What on purpose? I really want to eat it, but it doesn't taste good. Lin Xiaola said lazily. Renbaqian didn't say anything else. However, when Zhang Kaixian got off the carriage at night, her eyes were a little red. It seemed like she had been crying in the afternoon. He wasn't sure if she was crying about the tragic fate of the butterfly, or crying about her baby being eaten by Lin Xiaola. This was also the first time Renbaqian saw her look unhappy. The next day, Zhang Kaixian was full of energy again. However, she didn't go near Lin Xiaola anymore after catching the butterfly. When she released the butterfly, she would first check if Lin Xiaola had returned to the carriage and acted as if she was guarding against thieves. After 11 days of travel, Mount Tianyan was already in sight. How much longer? Renbaqian lifted the curtain and asked as he looked at the mountain in the distance. Mr. Yi, we will arrive in 1 day. In Gu City, the Empress looked at the empty candy tree and was in a daze for a long time. Without the colorful candies, this was just a withered tree. After Renbaqian left, she would be alone. Your Majesty, what do you want to eat for dinner? Hong Wuan asked from behind the Empress. Your Majesty? Hong Wuan called out softly again. What? The Empress came back to her senses. What do you want to eat for dinner? Up to you. The Empress replied faintly. After dinner, the Empress suddenly said, Get ready. I want to go to Tianjing Basin tomorrow to take a look. I still don't know what kind of life the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation are living under my rule, and why they are always restless. Yes. I will inform Protector General Shi to make arrangements. There's no need to inform him, the Empress stopped her. I want to go and take a look myself and don't want to listen to his nonsense. Your Majesty. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were shocked. Following which they asked, Your Majesty, I will inform Deputy Commander Xiong. Chapter 443. 1 day later, without Shi Wanyan knowing, the Empress brought Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan to Longzhou City. With the Empress's skills, she naturally wouldn't be discovered if she wanted to avoid other people. It is said that this is a dragon vein that runs through the entire Tianjing Basin. The mouth of the dragon faces north, so it is said that Tianjing Basin can conquer the world. The Empress said as she looked at Longzhou City, which was not far away. Of course, she didn't believe in such things. Conquer the world? Who dares to touch my world? A group of people who were locked up here were still delusional. The Empress was still dressed in red, and Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were dressed in green. The three of them standing on the road were extremely eye-catching. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan carried a small bag on their backs that contained many important things, such as the Empress's erguotu. There was also a change of clothes. The three of them arrived at the city gate and saw a long queue in front of them. Go and ask what's going on, the Empress said. Qing Yuan went forward for a while and returned. Your mistress, what is the entrance fee? The Empress frowned. Tianjing Basin was under her rule, so why didn't she know about the entrance fee? After thinking for a while, she didn't think too much about it. This would naturally be rectified in the future. Did you bring money? Qing Yuan. Hong Wuan. The two of them were at a loss. They had prepared a lot of things before coming, but they only thought about what the Empress needed. They were afraid that the Empress wouldn't like the food, So they packed some spices and forgot about the most important thing, money. After all, there was no place in the palace where money was needed. Money was something that was too distant for them. Your mistress, please forgive us. We forgot about the money. Shall we go back first? We will come back tomorrow after we withdraw the money. The two of them whispered nervously. The Empress raised her eyebrows. She never thought about these things when she went out with Renbachian. If she didn't see the entrance fee at the city gate, she wouldn't even remember to use money. What would Renbachian do if he encountered such a situation? The Empress recalled Renbachian's style, and then relaxed her frown. Forget it, let's use another method. What method? Let's think of a way to enter the city first, then find a rich man and rob him. The Empress believed that if Renbachian was here, he would definitely use this method. Ah. Both of them were stunned. Young miss, Her Majesty is going to rob money? If others knew about this, the two of them would definitely be cursed to death. That's settled then. Let's go to another place to enter the city. The Empress gestured for the two of them to pass through the fields near the city and find a remote place. Carrying one of them in each hand, they crossed a few hundred meters in a few seconds, crossed the city wall, and landed in the city. The Empress moved so quickly that the patrolling soldiers on the city wall didn't notice her at all. The three of them entered the city, passed through the alleys, and blended into the crowd. They looked around with great interest. Everything was new to them. The Empress was still fine, but Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were elated. Their attention had long been attracted by their surroundings, and they had completely forgotten that Her Majesty was preparing to rob them. However, even among the crowd, the three of them were extremely eye-catching. On one hand, it was because of their appearances, especially the Empress. On the other hand, it was because of their attire, especially the Empress. The Empress's bright red attire, coupled with her appearance, made it impossible for people not to notice her. The three of them were looking around, and the people around them were looking at them. The Empress quickly discovered this situation, but she didn't care. She didn't need to care about other people's opinions. In fact, there were many men who wanted to strike up a conversation. There were many merchants in Longzhou City, and there were also many rich people. Naturally, there were many people who had a stomach full of thoughts. However, the Empress's aura was too strong, and many people began to feel guilty after looking at her. As a result, the three of them actually didn't encounter any trouble. Young miss, the men are also wearing skirts. Young miss, look, that's a bone grinder. There are even bone knives there. I have never seen such a thing before. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were both excited. The Empress looked around while thinking about how to find Renbachian. That guy shouldn't be in Longzhou City now, right? She didn't know where he had gone. The Empress felt that it was very important to find Renbachian. Otherwise, there would only be two idiots by her side who knew nothing. With that guy around, at least she wouldn't have to think about robbing people. However, Tianjing Basin wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. There were more than 10 million people here. And it was really too difficult to find someone without a clue. The three of them walked around the city for half a day. After the initial novelty had passed, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan finally quietened down. The most important thing was that the two of them were starting to get hungry. The three of them had only eaten in the morning, and it was almost evening now. However, they didn't even bring any money with them, and they were too ashamed to tell the Empress that they were already hungry. The Empress heard their stomachs rumbling, but wasn't moved. After walking around the city for half a round, she had a rough idea. Generally speaking, the bigger the courtyard, the richer it was. After looking around for a long time, there was one courtyard that was the largest. It was located in the northern part of Longzhou City, and there weren't any buildings around it. This courtyard was the only one that occupied an area of more than 10 acres. There were 2 stone sculptures of a saber-toothed tiger at the entrance, and there were also a few guards there. If she guessed correctly, this was probably the residence of the warlord of Longzhou City. After guessing that it was the residence of the warlord, the Empress confirmed her target. With her status, she naturally wouldn't rob an ordinary person. The warlord of Longzhou City was a good target. The Empress didn't wait until nightfall. After walking around with the two of them, she headed straight for the residence of the warlord. There were a few guards at the entrance of the residence. When they saw a lady dressed in red walking toward the residence with two ladies dressed in green, their eyes lit up. Judging by their age, could it be that the warlord is looking for a love debt that he incurred outside? The guards secretly guessed, and went forward to stop the three of them. This is the residence of the warlord. If there's nothing else, please leave immediately. Although the lady dressed in red had an extraordinary aura, the gate of the Prime Minister was a rank 7 official. As the guards of the warlord's residence, they didn't mind seeing all kinds of extraordinary people. Ask the warlord to come out and see me. Forget it, I'll look for him myself. The Empress said faintly without even looking at them. Presumptuous. Who are you? The 4 guards were furious when they heard what the lady in red said. However, just as her hand reached for the hilt of her saber, the Empress's figure flashed. Then, she walked in as if nothing had happened. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan looked at each other and hurriedly followed. When the 3 of them entered the courtyard, the guards at the entrance swayed and fell to the ground one after another. After the 3 of them entered the courtyard, no one stopped them. Although the 3 of them walked around the residence without anyone leading them, others didn't know where they came from. Especially since they were 3 young ladies. They thought that they were the warlord's guests. After all, in Longzhou City, there had never been a case of someone knocking down a guard and barging in like this. Furthermore, the 3 of them were too indifferent and walked leisurely as if they were in their own home. In fact, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were a little nervous. However, at the same time, they were a little excited. Robbery was something they had only heard about in stories. They didn't expect to be able to do it themselves. Where's the warlord? The Empress walked through 2 courtyards, grabbed a servant from the side, and asked, "Sir is in the guest hall." The servant answered subconsciously when he heard the Empress's cold voice. "Lead the way." Yes, the servant thought to himself. He didn't know where this big shot came from, but he was actually more dignified than the warlord. When the Empress followed the servant inside, someone finally discovered that the guard outside had been knocked out, and the front courtyard immediately became noisy. Then, someone thought of the 3 ladies they had just seen, and sent someone inside to report while searching the residence. At this time, the Empress had already arrived at the courtyard where the guest hall was located. She saw a room in front of her with 4 doors open, and she could see a few people sitting in the room talking. There were 2 men sitting at the top, and 3 people sitting at the bottom of the table. "Warlord Sun, I heard that someone from the Yin Nation is here?" a man at the top asked. "Mr. Fong, you are quite well informed." A man in his 50s with a long beard replied with a smile on his face. In fact, he had just received this news. He knew that someone from the Yun Nation was passing through Longzhou City, but he didn't know about it. This made him feel that his subordinates were useless. "Warlord Sun, do you know anything about their purpose?" the man called Mr. Fong asked. Warlord Sun stroked his long beard. He couldn't possibly say that he hadn't seen them before, right? He only found out about such a person passing through 10 days after they left. As a warlord, he was afraid that he would be looked down upon if he didn't even know that someone like that had passed through his own city. Following which, he raised his head and saw a lady in red leading 2 ladies in green toward him under the guidance of a servant. He immediately frowned. Who was this person? Why didn't anyone inform him? When the Empress walked into the room, everyone looked at her with amazement in their eyes. The Empress was silent for a moment. She thought about the excuse she had prepared and felt that there shouldn't be any problem. She said coldly, "Robbery. Hand over the money." Everyone was immediately petrified. Chapter 444. City Lord Sun was so angry that he almost laughed after recovering from his shock. Robbing the City Lord Manor? If it wasn't for the fact that the person in front of him didn't seem to be delirious, he would have suspected that the other party was suffering from hysteria. "How should I address you? If you lack travel expenses, as long as you ask, I can still give you a sum of money. There's no need to joke like this." City Lord Sun's voice was rather calm. After all, he had seen all sorts of things and wouldn't get angry easily. Rob, take the money or die. The Empress was unmoved. She didn't have a good impression of these remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. On the contrary, she loathed them. If it weren't for the original agreement, she would have killed all of them long ago. At this moment, he was only taking money and sparing his life. This was already a great gift from him. Hearing this, City Lord Sun's expression immediately turned ugly. He had already spoken politely. Could it be that the other party thought that he, the City Lord of Longsho City, was easy to bully? Where did this madman come from to spout nonsense here? Before Lord Sun could speak, the person next to him couldn't stand it. The Empress's body swayed. Pa. The person who spoke immediately spurted out blood from his 7 orifices and collapsed to the ground. No one had expected that she would make a move just like that. The sudden turn of events shocked everyone once again. One by one, they stood up from their chairs in anger and wanted to pull out their weapons. Spirit will experts. Everyone stop. However, Warlord Sun instantly realized the other party's strength. The other party's speed was so fast that he couldn't react in time. There was no other possibility that the other party was a spirit will expert. As soon as he said that, everyone felt as if they had been hit by a paralysis spell. Beads of sweat flowed down their foreheads. How could it be a spirit will expert? Was this woman a spirit will expert? Senior. City Lord Sun rose to his feet and said hoarsely, I don't know what Senior wants, but I'll do my best. At the end of the day, he still didn't quite believe that a spirit will expert would rob him. What was the status of a spirit will expert? In the entire Tianjing Basin with a population of more than 10 million, there were only 13 famous spirit will experts. This was because the lifespan of a spirit will expert far exceeded that of an ordinary person. A spirit will expert would be treated like an ancestor no matter where he went. Why was there a need to commit robbery? Goldie. The Empress didn't know what Rinpochian was thinking. Her goal was very clear. You send someone to move all the gold from the vault here. City Lord Sun didn't expect that the other party would really only want money. However, he reacted quickly and immediately said to the servant who was paralyzed on the side. Ever since the Empress came in and said the first sentence, the servant was paralyzed. At this moment, upon hearing the order, he hurriedly got up and ran outside. The Empress wasn't afraid that they would play any tricks. It was just a matter of giving them another slap. These people wouldn't be able to create any trouble in front of her. Senior, please wait a moment. City Lord Sun cupped his hands. The Empress ignored him, and the room became quiet. Everyone kept quiet out of fear, and didn't dare to say a word for fear of angering the lady in front of them. It was obvious that this person was not a good-tempered person. City Lord, someone has broken into the mansion. Castellan Sun looked at the guard who rushed in to report the news, and expressionlessly waved his hand to chase him away. Let's go. Inform everyone to do what they are supposed to do. The intruder is a senior. Everyone waited for the time it took for an incense stick to burn before heavy footsteps could be heard from outside. A few people carried 4 boxes into the living room and placed them on the floor. City Lord Sun took a few steps forward and opened the boxes. 3 of the boxes were filled with gold ingots, and the last box was filled with all kinds of gold and silver ornaments. Senior, they are all here. Then he obediently stood to one side and said, Senior, they are all here. The Empress tilted her head, and Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan immediately went forward to open the bag. They picked up some gold ingots from the box and placed them inside. Then they looked at the gold ornaments. The ornaments were exquisitely made, and some were even inlaid with gems. Compared to the gold ingots, they were even more tempting. One of them packed a lot of ornaments until the bag was bulging. Only then did he stop. The Empress took a deep look at City Lord Sun. If this person's answer had been slightly off, she would have killed him with a slap. She didn't expect this person to be so quick-witted and let him escape with his life. This look made City Lord Sun break out in a cold sweat, but he still didn't dare to move. The Empress didn't say a word, turned around and went out. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan hurriedly followed her, and their backpacks jingled as they walked. Phew! After the Empress left the courtyard, everyone heaved a sigh of relief and slumped into their chairs. This person is dressed in red, and she looks so young. Could she be? One of them was halfway through his sentence when everyone's expression changed drastically, and they hurriedly covered his mouth. Even if you want to die, don't drag us down with you. Someone beside him scolded in a low voice. With this kind of appearance, this age, and this kind of dressing, not only had he guessed her identity, but everyone else had also guessed it. However, no one dared to say it. If they said it and that person heard it, they were afraid that no one here would be able to survive. That person shouldn't be here at all. If the news of her appearance were to spread, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. The entire Tianjing Basin would move upon hearing the news. Even though everyone didn't know why, that person had indeed appeared here. Furthermore, she was most likely the person that everyone was thinking of. A storm is about to arise. More than one person had this thought. After a while, everyone was finally relieved when they saw that that person didn't return. Warlord Sun, goodbye. The man who was previously addressed as Mr. Fong stood up and said. He had to bring this news back immediately. Warlord Sun didn't intend to keep him. He was still in a daze. Why did Qi Zixiao come here? Don't be fooled by the fact that they were pondering about how to mobilize their troops every day. When faced with Qi Zixiao, no one would not be afraid. After leaving the warlord's residence, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan asked, Miss, where are we going now? Their bellies were already deflated. Let's eat, the Empress said faintly. The two of them looked at each other with joy in their eyes. After finding a restaurant, the three of them sat in a side room. The two of them then opened their backpacks and piled the gold jewelry on the table. Miss, look, this bracelet is inlaid with 9 rubies. It's the most suitable for you. This necklace isn't bad either. While the two of them chattered away, the Empress looked out the window at the streets and pedestrians below. After the three of them had their meal, they casually found an inn to stay in. After arranging a room for Qi Zixiao, the innkeeper stood behind the counter and looked in the direction of the three of them. Her body trembled slightly. If someone were to see her at this moment, they would definitely be shocked by her expression. Her eyes were glowing, and the corners of her mouth were raised to an angle that was difficult for ordinary people to reach. She's too perfect. I have never seen such a beautiful person. I really want to skin her and make her into a doll to keep. I'm so excited. The thought of collecting such a beautiful doll makes me unable to control myself. My saliva is about to flow out. After standing behind the counter for a long time, she finally found some tea leaves to brew. Then she added something else to it. Following which, she swayed her body to the second floor and knocked on the door. Sir, would you like some tea? This is a good tea that I picked myself from the cliff. The Empress took a sip of erguotu and said, Leave us. Don't disturb me without my instructions. Chapter 445. That night, at the Yueli Inn, 2 figures appeared in the pitch-black lobby and quietly went up to the second floor. One of them took out a pipe and pierced through the window paper. Then he blew into the room forcefully, and a tube of powder was blown into the room. After blowing the knockout powder into both rooms, the two of them were relieved when they heard no sound from inside. The two of them were very confident in the intoxicating powder that they blew into the room. This powder was made from intoxicating flour and other ingredients after many years of research and development. It was very potent. An ordinary person would need 7 days to wake up after being poisoned by this powder. A man-will expert would need 3 days, and an earth-will expert would need more than half a day. Even a spirit-will expert would be slightly affected. Hee hee. One of them chuckled with a charming and sweet-sounding voice. The lady boss was very excited. Tonight, she would definitely be able to make a puppet that was worthy of being treasured. Have you brought everything? The lady boss asked excitedly. 16 skinning knives and 48 spirit needles. Aren't they all in this box? Since you are in such a hurry, I'm afraid that you have found something good. What good is there for me? The other person said. It was a man's voice. Good? You will know what good it is when you see her. The lady boss chuckled and pinched him. She had already decided that for this puppet, she would give up this inn and find another city to live incognito. Therefore, she didn't hesitate to make her move in the inn. She was afraid that something would go wrong along the way. A perfect puppet was her lifelong pursuit. What did she hear people say the last time? She could die in the evening if she heard the truth in the morning. She deeply agreed with this sentence. As long as she could make a perfect puppet, she had nothing else to ask for in the rest of her life. The man laughed, took out a small bottle, opened it and sniffed it. Then he pushed the door open. Go in, don't just stand here. The lady boss was slightly dissatisfied when she saw that he didn't move after pushing the door open. However, the man's words made her expression change. Why are you fine? The man's voice was full of disbelief. This drunken powder was the result of many years of research. Even his master was knocked out by a packet of it. One had to know that his master was a famous poison expert in Tianjing Basin, but he was still knocked out by the drunken powder, let alone other people. He saw a woman in red sitting at the table in the middle of the room. She rested her chin on one hand and looked at the door with bright eyes. She did not look like she was drugged at all. I would like to know what benefits there are. The Empress's tone was bone-chilling. The lady boss's expression changed several times before she scolded. Useless thing. If the soft way doesn't work, then the hard way. We don't want this in anymore. Capture her and leave the city immediately. She then turned to the room and smiled. You're unlucky to have met me. Who asked you to be so likable? She then turned to the man beside her and said, What are you waiting for? Don't hurt her skin, or it won't look good. Right now, all she could think about was making a puppet. It was rare to encounter such a perfect material in her lifetime, and she couldn't care less about anything else. Under her urging, the man beside her scurried toward the room. His feet moved a few times on the ground as if he was gliding. With a flip of his hand, a ray of light seemed to split the darkness in the room. It was a short knife that was 1 foot and 70 centimeters long. The gleam of the knife was like jade, but it wasn't the normal white color. The next second, the gleam of the knife appeared in front of the Empress's throat as if it was going to pierce through the throat of the woman sitting at the table. He was confident that as long as he touched it, the force would pass through the tip of the knife and shatter the other party's throat. At most, it would only leave a small mark. However, all these thoughts came to an abrupt halt in the next moment. His heart was beating wildly, and he was almost unable to control the panic in his heart. He only saw a pure white hand holding onto his knife. It was as if the knife had grown roots. No matter how much strength he exerted, it didn't move an inch. Almost at the same time, another figure flipped over his head and aimed a pair of short thorns at the Empress's eyes. The Empress's other hand tapped a few times in the air, and every time she tapped the tip of the short thorns, the lady boss only felt a strong force coming from her hand and sending her flying. According to the direction she was going, she was afraid that the top of the door would be sent flying, and the people in the inn would naturally wake up. At this moment, the Empress stood up, stretched out her hand at lightning speed, and pulled the lady boss back. She tapped one of their heads with her finger, and immediately, blood spurted out of their orifices and fell to the ground. However, if one took a closer look, both of them were still alive. Only then did the Empress unhurriedly lit the lamp and closed the door, following which, she opened the box that both of them carried with them. Inside there were 16 knives of different sizes. The big ones were the size of a palm, and the small ones were only the size of a finger. In addition, there were a bunch of bottles and 48 silver needles. The Empress held the needles in her hand, looked at the two of them, and then inserted them into their bodies one by one. As an Empress, the most important thing to do was to be fair. There couldn't be one more person, and there couldn't be one less person. Normally, these words were useless, but at times like this, they had to be used. After all 48 needles were inserted into the heads of the two of them, the Empress sized up the 16 knives of different sizes. Although they didn't speak directly, she clearly understood what the two of them said just now. The moment she heard about the skinning knife and the spirit needles, she knew what they meant. At this moment, she naturally wouldn't be lenient. Although the two of them were already half a step away from death, these things still had to be used on them. The Empress carefully arranged the 16 knives, and then divided them into two parts of different sizes. When she felt that the two parts of the knives were about the same size, she inserted the knives into the bodies of the two of them. After doing all this, the Empress was in a much better mood. They really didn't know what was good for them to do with her. The last person who dared to do anything to her. Thinking about it carefully, She really hadn't met anyone who dared to do anything to her. Especially when it was such a disgusting and infuriating idea. If it wasn't for the inconvenience of being outside, she would have hung the two of them to dry. After torturing the two of them, the Empress rummaged through the bottles and jars on their bodies. She didn't know what the two of them had blown into the room just now, but Qing Yuan and Hong Wan, who were next door, should have been poisoned as well. After sniffing the bottles one by one, the Empress felt a headache coming on. She didn't understand these things at all. At first, she didn't expect the two of them to have so many bottles and jars on their bodies. There were more than 10 bottles in the box, and there were still 7 or 8 bottles on their bodies. She didn't know which were the antidotes and which were the poison. Seeing that the two of them were still breathing, the Empress poured some of the 2 bottles into their mouths. The woman's face began to turn green, then purple, and finally, blisters began to appear all over her body. Her body also began to swell, and after a short while, yellow liquid began to flow out of her body. In a short period of time, she became a thin piece of human skin, and everything inside her body turned into pus. On the other hand, the body of the other person became brightly colored. Streaks of blood appeared on the surface of her body, and then exploded. Finally, all that was left was a lump of flesh. After throwing the 2 bottles to one side, the Empress turned around and went out of the inn. She knocked out the waiter and the chef, and then brought them to another empty room. Only then did she bring the bottles and jars over for the 2 of them to test the antidote. The room just now was filled with the stench of blood and stench, and it was already unbearable to stay in. After tossing and turning for 2 hours, the Empress finally found the antidote. Even the livestock in the back of the inn were all dead. Chapter 446. The Empress gave the 2 of them the antidote, and left the inn the next morning as if nothing had happened. However, Qing Yuan and Hong Wan were puzzled as to why the Empress had woken up so early, and was actually waiting for them outside. Also, where were the inn owner and the child? The 2 of them had a headache as if they had been drunk. After the 3 of them left, the unforeseen event in the inn was quickly discovered, and the warlord's men surrounded the inn. However, the scene was a mess, and Warlord Sun began to doubt whether it was Qi Zixiao. After all, with her status, how could she do such a thing? However, an old man from the magistrate's office quickly cleared his doubts. From the boxes and medicine bottles scattered everywhere, as well as the waiter, cook, and the poultry and livestock in the backyard, it was obvious that the other party was testing medicine. In addition, the traces left in the 2 rooms were similar to the smell in one of the medicine bottles. After testing the effect of the medicine, the whole process came to light. Even Warlord Sun couldn't help but say, sins committed by heaven can be forgiven, but sins committed by oneself can't be avoided. However, despite saying this, Warlord Sun no longer doubted the identity of that person. Both Yu Dao and Feng Er were at the earth will level, yet they died so easily here. The other party was indeed a spirit will expert as he thought. In that case, it had to be the person he was thinking about. At the thought of this, Warlord Sun wanted to praise himself for being smart and quick-witted. If not for his quick thinking, the warlord residence would probably be gone by now. He would go back and marry a concubine to calm himself down. Although he thought this way, he knew that a big change was coming. Tianyin Mountain stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and there were many rare treasures on the mountain. The highest peak of the mountain pierced through the clouds, as if it was connecting heaven and earth. Therefore, it was called Tianyin Mountain, and was also the highest mountain in Tianjing Basin. Rinpochen already knew that there was an alliance in Tianjing Basin, but he only heard about it later. However, some things were only heard later. This alliance was called the Hidden Alliance, and it had only been formed in the past 20 years. The one who organized this alliance wasn't one person, but a group of people. A group of people who had rebelled against the Hao Nation, and were defeated by the Aboriginals. They had no choice but to sign an agreement and be chased into Tianjing Basin. Initially, those people rebelled against the Hao Nation for the sake of their ideals or power, but they ended up in such a state. Some of them refused to give up after entering the valley, and formed the 3 major factions of Tianjing Basin. A portion of them had no interest in fighting for power with them. Instead, They formed their own sects, wanting to pass down all their knowledge, so that one day they could go out. There were also some who were completely disheartened, and lived in seclusion. Many years later, a few of them ran around and gathered all the experts who lived in seclusion, forming the first secret alliance. At that time, Tianjin Basin was also in a state of chaos. Various factions attacked each other, and wanted to annex the other factions to form an independent faction. They wanted to unify all the people in Tianjin Basin before fighting the aboriginals. During that period of time, the people in Tianjin Basin had no way of making a living. After that, the secret alliance roped in the various sects and negotiated with the three major forces. That was how the current situation came about. However, although the three great forces seemed to have stopped fighting on the surface, in reality, they were still playing dirty tricks. After all, during that period of war, the three sides had also formed many personal grudges. However, there was still a sense of righteousness. In the face of righteousness, all parties tried their best to restrain themselves. At most, there would only be some small disputes, but there wouldn't be any large-scale wars. Currently, the secret alliance was nominally united with the three major forces and various sects to form an even larger alliance. They gathered their strength in Tianjin Basin and prepared for a future war. After understanding the history of the secret alliance, Runbachian couldn't help but admire them. He didn't admire the secret alliance, but Shiwanya. Such a large organization was created right under his nose, and he actually didn't know much about it. He could be considered a talent whose brain was full of muscles. If he didn't make this trip, he reckoned that this group of people could really stir up some trouble. After all, Tianjin Basin had been accumulating for so many years, and there were many practitioners. There were tens of thousands of man-will experts, hundreds of earth-will experts, more than 10 spirit-will experts, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers. If there were so many ants, they could even bite an elephant to death. If Tianjin Basin were to really become chaotic, Deya would probably have to suffer a lot. In particular, the northeast was at war with the Yun nation. In the north, Great Xia was still unwilling to give up. In the southeast, there was the Chun nation, which no one knew what they were planning. With all these factors added up, Deya was really doomed. When that time came, he would have to go to the 60,000 mountains with the Empress to farm and hunt, and his son would run around the village naked. Thinking about that kind of life, Runbachian felt that it was better for them to die than for him. Unlike at the Golden Ring residence, when everyone arrived at the foot of the mountain, someone went up to report, and soon came down to bring everyone up the mountain. They followed a small path, shuttled through the forest for a while, and finally passed through a kernel. What appeared in front of Runbachian was a farmland and a village. It was the most ordinary kind of village in the mountains. There were hundreds of sparsely scattered houses in the village, and there were crooked fences made of wood outside the houses. Some of the courtyards even had bundles of firewood. If he didn't know his destination, Runbachian would really find it hard to believe that this was where the secret alliance was located. Weren't they all so-called experts? At the very least, they should be more outstanding, right? For example, like Huang Yaoshi, who planted peach blossoms and played the flute when he had nothing to do. However, looking at this old lady who carried 2 tall firewood into the village, she was too down to earth. Are you surprised? I was also surprised when I came here for the first time. Zhang Kaixian bounced to Runbachian's side and looked up. Very surprised, Runbachian answered truthfully. However, the grandparents here are very nice people. Zhang Kaixian grinned at Runbachian, bounced to the front, and said, Grandma who? I'm here to see you. Girl, you're here again. The old lady looked to be in her 80s or 90s. She was carrying 2 tall firewood, but her movements weren't slow at all. She turned her head and smiled when she saw Zhang Kaixian running over. Do you need help? I can help you carry a small bundle. Zhang Kaixian deliberately stretched out a finger and gestured, indicating that it was a small bundle. Girl, you are still so considerate. My waist really can't carry it anymore. As the old lady spoke, she quickly reached out and pressed all the firewood on top of Zhang Kaixian's head. It's a small bundle. Zhang Kaixian quickly raised the firewood with both hands and watched as the firewood got lower and lower, and was about to drown her. Although it was firewood, It was very dense and weighed at least 500 kilograms. How could she lift it? It could already be said that her skills weren't bad since she wasn't immediately pressed to the ground. The people from the Golden Ring residence quickly ran over to help, but by the time they rescued Zhang Kaixian, her head was already full of firewood. Renbaqian didn't say anything and slowly followed behind everyone toward the village with Lin Xiaola. At the entrance of the village, there was an old man with wrinkles all over his face, who was wearing traditional clothes, sitting in the shade and reading a book attentively. Seeing everyone come over, he raised his head and smiled at them. Only half of his teeth were left in his mouth. Come, come, come. Someone help me see if there's a second half of this book. I have already flipped through it several times, but I don't know if there's a second half. Grandpa Qiao, I will help you in a while. I have read a lot of books these days, so maybe I have read it before. Zhang Kaixian shouted while holding a bundle of firewood. You can't read it. You definitely haven't read it before. The old man quickly said. Why can't I read it? How do you know that I haven't read it before? Zhang Kaixian wasn't convinced. Men can read it, but women can't. Girls can't read it either. The old man shook his head. Chapter 447. Do you want to read it? The old man didn't show the book to Zhang Kaixian, and asked Renbaqian instead. Thank you. Renbaqian happened to be interested in this world's erotic literature, and had no reason to refuse. Seeing that Renbaqian readily agreed, the old man smiled like a chrysanthemum and said, You're a good person. You're much more sincere than those who obviously want it but say no. The surrounding people were speechless. Are those who read erotic literature with you a good person? Are those who go to the brothel with you blood-related brothers? Renbaqian happily took the book and even said politely, Thank you for sharing. This made the old man smile even more happily and praised. You're a good person. You have good taste and are polite. The others didn't understand, but Renbaqian did. Only an experienced person like him would understand such things. Looking at the major forums on the internet, there were trolls running amok everywhere. Just a casual sentence would cause people to spew a torrent of abuse. Everyone was filled with hostility. Only the netizens in 1024 all said, Thank you for sharing. The original poster is a good person. Good people will have a peaceful life. There was almost no hostility. Therefore, everyone was a good person. I'll take it with me then. I'll return it to you later. Renbaqian held the book in his hand and gestured. If you like it, you don't have to return it. You can return me a new one in the future. A treasure sword for a hero and a beauty for a beauty. The old man was very generous. However, Renbaqian still felt that something was wrong. A treasure sword for a hero, a beauty for a beauty, and erotic literature for... Renbaqian felt that he shouldn't think about this in detail. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the old man was scolding him. However, the old man was smiling like a chrysanthemum in full bloom, and even gave him erotic literature. How could he let Lin Xiaola scratch his face? Renbaqian cupped his hands at the old man, and put the book in his arms speechlessly. What's in the book? Let me see. Why can't women read it? Lin Xiaola came over curiously. You'll know in 50 years. Renbaqian said. After thinking about it, even though Lin Xiaola looked alright, she might not be able to get married. Maybe it would be another 100 years. When they entered the village, they would occasionally see old people sunbathing in the courtyard and watering the flowers. They were no different from the old ladies in the village. In any case, he saw a person drawing on a table in the courtyard. The person was squatting in a horse stance. One of his forearms was parallel to the table, and the brush in his hand was drawing on the paper from time to time. This person's every move looked very imposing, and Renbaqian finally felt that he had the demeanor of an expert. After all, the people here were all figures of the older generation who had survived the Great War back then. These experts weren't bumpkins, so it wasn't strange for some of them to be proficient in the 4 arts. Village Chief Grandpa, what are you drawing? Zhang Kaixian carried the firewood and jumped into the courtyard. Painting mountain, the old man said without raising his head. Jean Caissien stretched her neck to take a look at the drawing before turning her head to look at the nearby tall mountain. She said doubtfully, "This mountain is a little fat. So majestic. A little short? He's accumulating momentum to break through the heavens one day. This is obviously a hill, right? This is called looking at the mountain but not seeing it. Little girl, you talk too much." The old man flew into a rage out of humiliation. Even though Runbachian didn't see what the old man was drawing, he understood that this person wasn't an ordinary person to be able to draw a mountain that pierced the sky like a hill. Runbachian felt that this person had the demeanor for nothing, but it turned out that he was a soul painter. As he thought about it, he added, "Soul painter." The old man had sharp ears, and his eyes lit up when he heard this. He laughed and said, "This little fellow knows what's good and bad. The most important thing in painting is the soul, the intent, and not the form. Come, 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 little fellow. My painting can only be seen by people with good eyesight. This old man is a spirit will expert, just a little weaker than me." Lin Qiaola added at the right time. She gestured with one hand pointing to the sky, and the other pointing to the ground. Renbachian felt that what she meant was the difference between heaven and earth. However, what did she mean when she said it was a little weaker and gestured like that? "Little girl, you talk big." The old man was so angry that he almost laughed. "I won't lower myself to your level today. Little fellow, come and take a look at my painting." The old man sized her up carefully and turned to Renbachian. Finding someone who could appreciate his painting was much more important than fighting with others. "Sorry to disturb you." Renbachian walked to the table with his hands behind his back after he finished speaking. He had a strange look on his face. "This isn't a hill. This is obviously a steamed bun with the outline of another steamed bun behind it. There is also a small stone drawn on the top of the steamed bun. How is it?" the old man asked complacently, looking horizontally into a ridge and vertically into a peak. This poem immediately popped up in Runbachian's mind. From a certain angle, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was an undulating mountain range. "Good, well said." The old man immediately laughed when he heard this poem. "This poem goes well with my painting. It suits the artistic conception." Is there a next line? Different heights, different distances. Not bad, not bad. The old man laughed as he added these two lines to the painting. Renbachian felt that what the ancients said was right. Hooligans weren't scary, but a cultured hooligan. Not only was the person in front of him a cultured hooligan, but he was also a cultured spirit will hooligan. The little girl at the side was passively looking at the painting, looking horizontally into a ridge and vertically into a peak. She was still carefully studying the ridges and peaks in this painting. The old man then put the paintbrush aside. Seeing that Jean Caissien was still holding the firewood, he said, "Aren't you going to send the firewood to Hu Qinghua? Aren't you tired of holding it?" "Oh." Jean Caissien quickly nodded and seriously said to Renbachian, "Your poem is really good." She then ran out with the firewood. The old man stretched out his hand and rubbed it twice before looking up at Renbachian and asking, "This little fellow is a member of my sect. Not bad. Not bad. What's your relationship with Yi Sanbua?" Rinbachian's mind started to spin after hearing this. This old man knew someone with the surname Yi in the Yun nation? That person was at least 70 years old. If he was still alive, he would probably be an expert. However, he hadn't heard of such a person in Qingfeng City. In that case, there were two possibilities. Either he was an expert from the older generation, or he was the ancestor of the warlord of Qingfeng City, and was long dead. Or maybe it was the old man who deceived him. There were often such scenes on TV. If he climbed up the pole and said it was his ancestor, the old man would immediately laugh 3 times and then slap him to death. After thinking for a while, Renbachian said, "I have never heard of this person. May I know how you know him?" The old man was silent for a moment before sighing and saying, "Is that so? I thought I had met an old friend. Time flies, and things remain the same, but people have changed. Come in and talk." The old man waved his hand and seemed to be in low spirits. Renbachian felt that he might be overthinking, but there was no harm in being careful. After all, he was now in the hinterland of the enemy. If he succeeded, It would be easier to pacify Tianjing Basin in the future. If he was seen through, he would probably be hunted down. Chapter 448. The house was very simple, and was made of ordinary wood. There was a bed, a wooden cabinet, and the place where the table should be was empty. Renbaqian guessed that it was the table outside. However, the most eye-catching thing was the head of a lion-like beast with 6 short horns hanging on the wall. The moment Renbaqian stepped through the door, the head suddenly opened its eyes. At the same time, the aura of a ferocious beast hit him in the face. It was as if the head in front of Renbaqian was no longer a head, but a ferocious beast that was more than 4 meters long that was about to pounce on him. The ferocity in the eyes of the ferocious beast, and the threatening aura made Renbaqian have no doubt that he would be torn to pieces in the next second. Renbaqian felt as if his heart was firmly grasped by a big hand, and he subconsciously reached for his gun at the back of his waist. Gulp! A clear and crisp gulp came from the middle of the throat, and it sounded like a clap of thunder in Renbaqian's head. Renbaqian suddenly woke up from his hallucination, and saw that the eyes of the head on the wall were still open. The eyes were completely black, like a pitch-black whirlpool that could suck in one's soul. Lin Xiaola, who was beside him, was staring at the head on the wall, and her throat was still making gulping sounds. Looking at her hands carefully, he saw that her fingernails had grown by 1 centimeter. The old man carefully looked at Lin Xiaola with some surprise. Then a muffled shout came from his chest. Silence! He flicked a steel nail from his hand and nailed it to the head of the beast. A roar was transmitted into Renbaqian's mind, following which the head closed its eyes, and Lin Xiaola resentfully quieted down. Her eyes never left the head, and she secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Senior, this is? Renbaqian couldn't help but ask. Although he had seen many things in this world, such as the elongation saber and the chain in his head, and he knew that he didn't know much about this world, the abnormality of this head still shocked him. It seemed as if this head was still alive. Back then, I met a ferocious beast in the 60,000 mountains with my master. It has been so many years, but it still hasn't settled down. The old man glanced at the head on the wall with a look of reminiscence in his eyes. It's still alive? Renbaqian cried out involuntarily. How can he be alive like this? The old man asked with a smile. There was no body, only a head hanging on the wall. No one knew how many years had passed, and no matter how one looked at it, it could not be more dead. However, whether it was the opening of its eyes or the roar, he had just experienced it personally. What happened just now? Renbaqian asked doubtfully. He's dead but not dead, the old man said lightly. Can I trade that with you? Lin Xiaola pointed at the head, her eyes shining. Oh. What do you want to exchange for it? The old man laughed. This one is much more valuable than yours. Lin Xiaola reached into her tube top and took out 3 white rabbit creamy candies that carried her body fragrance. Judging from her expression, she seemed to be in pain. 3 white rabbit creamy fruits was her limit. What is this? The old man looked at the thing in Lin Xiaola's hand curiously. He had never seen this thing before. Renbaqian silently grabbed the 3 white rabbit creamy candies from her hand and placed another 3 in her hand. Although she was a hard-working girl, he felt embarrassed to see her being taken advantage of like this. My 3 are a little bigger. Give me another one. He didn't expect Lin Xiaola to turn around and raise an objection. Renbaqian was speechless. He silently took the 3 candies from Lin Xiaola and placed the warm one back into her palm. He couldn't be bothered with her. Creamy candies are delicious. You definitely won't be able to find them anywhere else, Lin Xiaola said confidently to the old man. Forget it. This thing is dead but not dead. It's useless for you to take it. The old man shook his head. Let's have a fight. If I win, give me that. Lin Xiaola saw that the exchange had failed, so she immediately changed to snatching it. However, this was exactly what she wanted and saved 3 white rabbit creamy fruits. What do you want that Jieshua's head for? The old man was a little puzzled. It looks delicious. Lin Xiaola was almost drooling as she looked at the head. Are you ready? I'm going up. Lin Xiaola even reminded him out of goodwill. The old man was speechless. Let's go out. I also want to see what an expert who is just a little more powerful than me looks like. The old man gestured with his hand. It seemed like he hadn't forgotten the difference between heaven and earth that Lin Xiaola had just said. Lin Xiaola's body gracefully leaped and landed in the courtyard. The old man smiled at Renbaqian before walking out unhurriedly. As soon as Renbaqian followed him out, he saw two figures colliding. Their figures couldn't be seen clearly at all, as if two gusts of wind had collided. The sound of bodies colliding was constantly heard in the air. As soon as the fight started, more than a dozen figures suddenly jumped out of the village and landed around the courtyard. All of their faces were wrinkled, and some of them couldn't even straighten their backs. These were the experts who had survived until now. After sensing that there was a fight here, they ran over to watch the fight. In less than a minute, a scream was heard. It was from the old man. Renbaqian was finally relieved that Lin Xiaola didn't suffer a loss. Stop! I don't want to fight anymore. After a while, the old man shouted again. His figure gradually turned from illusory to solid as he stood there. The old man's clothes were tattered, his face was scratched, and he had a complicated look on his face. He wasn't a weakling among the spirit wheel experts, and was one of the top experts in Tianjing Basin. Losing to a young girl made him look bad. However, what was worse was the other party's methods. Why was she scratching people? She even scratched people's faces. Didn't she know not to hit people in the face? Originally, even if the old man lost, he would only say that the younger generation would surpass the older generation. At most, he would be shocked, guess the origin of the other party, and feel disappointed. He had to admit that he was old. At such a young age, even if she started cultivating in her mother's womb, how could she be so powerful? However, at this moment, he didn't have any other thoughts. His mind was filled with, who did this girl learn from? Why was she scratching people? Everyone looked at the situation in the courtyard, looked at Lin Xiaola, who was licking her claws, and then looked at the old village chief with ugly expressions. Qingyan Sword, who had dominated the world for many years, was defeated by a little girl just like that? Where was the Qingyan Sword who had dominated the world with his sword? Qingyan Sword? Puffed, your old bones are about to be buried in the ground. A tall old man with white hair and beard had a complicated look on his face. Finally, he cursed bitterly and leaped more than 30 meters away. After a few steps, he couldn't be seen anymore. Another old man shook his head and sighed. We are old. We are all old. More people turned around and left with complicated looks on their faces. Qingyan Sword was the name of the old village chief back then. It was a name that suppressed many people, and was also a symbol of an era. Today he was defeated by a young man, which made everyone feel a little sad and disappointed. The old man opened his mouth for a long time. After a while he touched his face and said with a gloomy expression, "Can't we not scratch our face?" Renbaqian was speechless. It seemed like being scratched on the face was more unacceptable to him than being defeated. The old man's lips moved a few times before he sighed faintly and said, "Back then, I was also handsome, elegant, and outstanding. It was all because of this face." Chapter 449. 2 hours later, Renbaqian and Lin Xiaola sat by the fire. Renbaqian held a stick in his hand and roasted the jieshue's head over the fire. Lin Xiaola was in charge of drooling, which flowed down her chin, neck, collarbone, and onto the plains. Her eyes were dull and drooling, and she looked exactly like a mentally disabled child. But every time the eyes on the head began to move, she would slap them and return to her previous appearance as a mentally disabled child. The old man sat not far away, and a sense of sorrow rose from the bottom of his heart. This mentally disabled little girl had scratched his face. Beside him was Zhang Kaixian. She sat on the steps with one hand supporting her chin as she looked at the beast's head being roasted over the fire. Why isn't this thing cooked yet? Renbaqian felt that his hands were sore. He had been roasting it for more than an hour, but there were no signs of it being cooked. If it were that simple, why would I have suppressed it here for decades? You can forget about roasting it in this lifetime. The old man heard Renbaqian's doubts and immediately raised his head, looking like an expert giving advice. What should I do then? Renbachian asked shamelessly. If it were alive, you wouldn't be able to do anything. However, it died a long time ago and isn't completely dead yet. Just soak it in the juice of the three-way flower for 3 days and start a fire with phoenix wood to roast it, the old man pointed out. How about eating it raw? Renbachian thought about it and felt that it was too troublesome, so he turned his head and asked Lin Xiala. Lin Xiala pursed her lips. On the one hand, she felt that this thing tasted better when it was cooked, but on the other hand, she didn't want to wait too long. She had a strong appetite when she saw this thing. If she had to wait for another day, her saliva would flood the village, let alone 3 days. Village Chief Grandpa, do you have the three-way flower and phoenix wood here? Zhang Kaixian asked the old man. How can you find them here? These things can only be found in the 60,000 mountains. Even in the 60,000 mountains, I'm afraid that you won't be able to find them without 2 to 3 years. Furthermore, you won't be able to chew them raw. Back then, even my master had to expend a lot of effort to kill this thing. The old man shook his head. After hearing this, Lin Xiala didn't hesitate any longer. She immediately took the jieshua head out of the fire and began to gnaw on it. It made a crunching sound as if she was gnawing on wood, and Renbachian felt his teeth ache just from hearing it. Roar! Another furious roar appeared in everyone's mind. It was as if Jieshua's head was letting out an unwilling roar. Lin Xiala gave it a backhand slap and continued to chew. With a smile on his face, the old man calmly looked at Lin Xiala gnawing on the fruit, as if he could already foresee the result of her failure. No matter what, he had finally vented his frustrations. Then everyone watched helplessly as Lin Xiala bit off a piece of skin from Jieshua's head. Hiss, how is that possible? The old man's eyes widened. He had heard about this world puppet from his master. It was said that it was impervious to swords and spears, impervious to fire and water, and difficult to injure with great strength. Even his master had spent a great deal of effort to kill this Jieshua. Even after so many years, he couldn't do anything to Jieshua's head. His Qingyun sword could be considered a treasure sword that could cut through iron as if it were mud, and it only produced sparks when he slashed at it. However, this little girl could actually bite it. Her teeth were sharper than the Qingyun sword. Then the old man's gaze suddenly became sharp as he stared at Lin Xiala. Renbachian immediately became vigilant. Sure enough, she isn't a human. I initially thought that she had practiced some special martial arts, but it turns out that she isn't a human, the old man said coldly after looking at her for a while. What do you mean? Renbachian's heart skipped a beat when he saw his expression. Don't play dumb, the old man said coldly. Then he stared at Lin Xiala for a while before sighing and saying, Forget it, I can't care about this anymore. What do you mean, senior? I really don't know, Renbachian said as he thought that he might be able to find out about Lin Xiala's origin from this old man. It's useless to say more. Good luck. The old man didn't want to talk about this matter anymore. Although he didn't speak anymore, his expression became much colder. Renbachian knew that the old man definitely knew something. Seeing that the old man wasn't willing to say more, Renbachian frowned and wondered how he could get more information out of the old man. In fact, the old village chief didn't know much. Back then, his master had just broken through to the spirit will level and went to the 60,000 mountains, but he returned with serious injuries. Before he died, he said that those who weren't stronger than him shouldn't go to the depths of the 60,000 mountains, and should be careful of those who looked like humans but weren't. Previously, he didn't understand why, but now that he saw Lin Xiala, he suddenly remembered his master's words. This was related to the truth of his master's death, so he naturally wanted to know more. However, the battle with the aboriginals was imminent, so he forcibly suppressed his thoughts. He had also made up his mind that after this battle, he would capture this woman no matter what price he had to pay and interrogate her about what was hidden in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. After the old man calmed down, he raised his head and asked Renbachian, Tell me your purpose for coming here. Renbachian repeated what he had said at the Golden Ring residence. I have 3 requests. First, you have to strengthen your attacks and attract the attention of the aboriginals. Secondly, they didn't have enough weapons. Thirdly, she has to follow us. The old man pointed at Lin Xiala and said, Xiwanya isn't easy to deal with. Experts of the same level aren't his match in a one-on-one fight. Her skills are pretty good, and if she makes a move, she will be able to delay Xiwanya for some time. We can then surround and kill the other 2 Cardinal Heaven experts in the army. I can promise you the first and third requests, but the second one is a little troublesome. It's not easy to transport weapons from the Yin Nation, and now we're at war. It won't be easy to transport a large number of weapons over. It will consume a lot of manpower and resources, and it will be easier to be discovered, Ren Baqian said after pondering for a while. That's your problem. After all, if you guys were to go against the ancient race alone, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to hold on for long. If you want us to risk our lives, you have to show us something, the old man said coldly. Ren Baqian retorted. Great Xia is here too, right? I wonder where he is. What conditions did he promise you? Also, without us, you guys won't be able to do anything. We can totally wait for them to attack Wangjing and delay the line of soldiers before making a move. The pressure we have to face is almost the same as if we were to make a move now, the old man said. As for the Great Xia people, that's between us and them. The Aboriginals are training new soldiers, Ren Baqian reminded him. Their target is definitely you guys. All right, I promise you that I will find a way to transport the weapons over within 3 months. You guys must make a move after 3 months, Ren Baqian said after pondering for a while. In fact, none of these 3 conditions could be fulfilled. However, they had to put on a good act. That's settled then. There are empty houses in the village. You guys can stay there for the night. The old man threw these words and returned to his room. At night, Ren Baqian and Lin Xiala sat in an empty room. Lin Xiala was still gnawing on the Jiesu's head. When there was no one around, she suddenly looked up and said, Should I go and kill him? He's hostile. Continue gnawing on your Jiesu first. Now isn't the time yet. Ren Baqian waved his hand and looked at Lin Xiala, who continued to gnaw on the Jiesu's head. Looking at the old man's big reaction, this guy in front of him had a lot of secrets. There were also a lot of secrets in this world. The thing in the belly of Mount Liutsue, the unknown location of the Sword Mountain, the mystery of the disappearance of the previous 2 emperors, and now the origin of Lin Xiala. Chapter 450. Early in the morning, Ren Baqian stood at the entrance of the village and looked into the distance. A few youngsters were practicing martial arts there. Some of them were practicing swordsmanship and fists. These were the disciples of the elders in the village. After all, those elders were active experts 70 years ago. Many of their lifespans were nearing the end of their lifespans. In order not to bring all their knowledge to the earth, they tried to find a successor to pass on their legacy. Ren Baqian watched from the side for a long time. The martial arts of these youngsters were very different from the Fist of Death that he had learned. Compared to their martial arts, the Fist of Death was more direct, more open, and more suitable for killing on the battlefield. It also fully displayed the strength of the Aboriginals. On the other hand, their martial arts were completely based on the martial arts of Jianghu. They were more inclined to maneuver in a small area, fight one-on-one, and use more feints. Another important point was that their moves looked good. At least, they looked very elegant when they moved. Unlike the Fist of Death, which only had Black Tiger steals the heart, it didn't look as good as their martial arts. When used by the Aboriginals, the Fist of Death was completely overpowered and powerful. However, Ren Baqian didn't have the strength of the Aboriginals, so the power of the Fist of Death was much weaker. Ren Baqian felt that if he were to fight against these youngsters, he might not be their match. At the thought of this, Ren Baqian felt even more miserable. Not only could he not defeat a 10-year-old Lolita, but he might not even be able to defeat a random cat or dog. How could he endure this? On the contrary, the set of boxing techniques that the Empress taught him was the most suitable for him. It had a strange style, and was completely aimed at killing people. Many of the moves were imitations of the movements of beasts pouncing on human experts. This set of boxing techniques was completely used to hunt people. It was a pity that the movements of this set of boxing techniques were too difficult. Many of the movements were very strange and didn't conform to human bone structure and strength. At that time, he saw the Empress execute it smoothly, but when it was his turn, he simply couldn't execute many of the movements, let alone practice it. Up until now, he still couldn't execute all the movements and still focused on practicing the Fist of Death. Brother Lin, this move of yours is wrong. You have to move it downwards by 30%. Sister Hua, this move of yours is missing 2 sword flowers. You have to exert more strength on your wrist. A clear and melodious voice sounded. The little girl, Zhang Kaixian, ran back and forth to help everyone give pointers on the moves. It was hard to believe that Zhang Kaixian, this little girl, was actually better than these people in terms of martial skills. These elders liked Zhang Kaixian's character very much. When she came last time, many elders passed on a few cultivation techniques to her. Her innate talent was also pretty good, and there were many areas where she practiced better than the disciples of these elders. After staying here for 2 days, she was sent by those elders to correct the mistakes of these disciples in their moves. If it was someone else doing this, they would definitely be hated by others. I practice every day, and you only learned a little. Yet, you're actually better than me. How can I not be angry? However, Zhang Kaixian's innocent and romantic personality made people unable to hate her even if they wanted to. Renbaqian stood at the side for a long time. He wanted to give it a try. After all, he had never fought with someone who was at the same level as him, and he didn't know what level he was at. However, when he thought about the 2 sets of fist techniques he could use, he could only give up on this idea. The killing fist was too obvious. He couldn't use the fist techniques of the aboriginals at all. The other one was the tortoise fist. After thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. After eating breakfast, Renbaqian was ready to leave. He still had to go down the mountain to inform the Yun nation to transport the weapons over and prepare to look at the other cities. When Renbaqian found the old village chief's house, more than 20 elders were actually sitting in the courtyard. There's no need to say anything. If we kill her, they will definitely be in chaos. Even if there will be a cleansing and revenge, how can there be no deaths in war? The tall, white-haired elder that Renbaqian saw before said. His white hair fluttered even though there was no wind, and he looked imposing. Over the past 2 days, Renbaqian had also learned the name of this elder. He was called the Celestial Hound. It was said that once he set his sights on someone, he would bite them like a dog and not let go. Furthermore, he had a bad temper and even dared to roar at the heavens. That was why he had such a name. However, most people didn't dare to say this in front of him. Otherwise, he would not rest until one of them died. The old dog's words are correct, another elder said as he knocked on the bamboo cane in his hand. This is a good opportunity. Don't hesitate, another elder said. Shiwanya will definitely take revenge, and I don't know how many people will die. That's a matter for the future. Just like what the old dog said, how can there be no deaths in war? We can't miss this opportunity. Contact all the experts at the Earth Will level and above. No matter how powerful she is, she's just one person. I don't believe that the entire Tianjing Basin can't kill her alone. Renbaqian walked to the door and stopped. Everyone's conversation was heard by him. Who were they trying to kill? From what they said, it should be the higher-ups of the aboriginals. Otherwise, they wouldn't have involved Shiwanya and said things like crazy revenge. The person they wanted to kill was also very powerful, to the extent that it was boundlessly powerful. They needed to gather all the experts in Tianjing Basin to besiege and kill her. At this thought, Renbaqian was stunned. There was no need to think about it. Besides the Empress, there was no one else who met these conditions. But what was the situation now? Was the Empress in Gu City or somewhere else? Both of you come in, the old village chief Qingyan Sword said in a clear voice. Renbaqian calmed himself down and said, I see that everyone is discussing something. I don't know if I'm disturbing you. Come in and talk, Qingyan Sword said. Renbaqian and Lin Xiaola stood at one side. Lin Xiaola was still holding the Jieshue's head, which was almost half the size of her body. After 2.5 days, she had gnawed more than half of it. What was visible was the purplish-red shriveled flesh and white bones. It looked very horrifying. There's a piece of news that has just arrived. It's very important to us and to all of you. You need to take action too, Qingyun's sword said after glancing at Lin Xiaola. Please. Ren Baqian cupped his hands, but his heart tightened. Qi Zixiao appeared alone in Tianjing Basin. How can that be? Although Ren Baqian was already prepared, he still couldn't help but be surprised after hearing what the other party said. Why would the Empress appear alone in Tianjing Basin? What was she doing here? Qingyun's sword felt that Ren Baqian's reaction was very normal. He was also surprised when he heard this news. After all, the Empress of Dayo actually came to Tianjing Basin alone. It was indeed puzzling. Of course, she wasn't alone. There were two maids by her side, but in everyone's eyes she was alone. Ren Baqian already knew their plan, but he still asked subconsciously, "You guys are preparing to?" "That's right. Gather all the experts and besiege her. Therefore we need all of you to contribute," Qingyun's sword said in a deep voice as he looked at Lin Xiaola. His target was Lin Xiaola. As for Ren Baqian, it wasn't that he looked down on him, but he was really a piece of trash in terms of martial arts. That's how it should be. Seeing that Qingyun's sword had made his decision, the celestial hound immediately slapped its thigh and laughed heartily. "Even if I die there, it will be worth it." Besieging and killing the fifth most powerful expert in the world, and the Empress of Dayo was a big deal. Chapter 451. Everyone discussed for a long time, before returning to their residences. In less than an hour, 7 or 8 elders left the hidden village with lofty sentiments. Needless to say, they were calling their friends and inviting people to come out of the mountains. Those who were personally sought out by this group of old fellows were definitely not ordinary people. These old fellows went out to look for experts who lived in seclusion. In addition to those experts who lived in seclusion, there were also the 3 major powers and various large and small sections. Those who participated in this siege were all experts at the Earthwill level and above in Tianjing Basin. If it weren't for the inconvenience of mobilizing so many experts and the fact that the Empress's whereabouts weren't fixed, they would have arranged for a large number of ordinary elite soldiers and man-will experts to wear down the Empress's strength. Under the circumstances where the Empress's whereabouts were uncertain, only experts could reach the destination in the shortest time possible. Something big has happened. This was the only thought in Ren Baqian's mind. Why did the Empress come to Tianjing Basin? Originally, Ren Baqian wanted to get some weapons to stabilize them and enter their ranks to understand their entire plan. When the time came, he could make targeted arrangements and eliminate all of them in one fell swoop. However, all his plans had been disrupted. Why did the Empress come to Tianjing Basin? She didn't bring any guards and only brought Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan. The Empress wasn't a god. Although she was very powerful in Ren Baqian's eyes, even the 5th most powerful expert in the world wouldn't be able to escape if she was surrounded by hundreds of Earthwill experts and more than 10 Spiritwill experts. After all, ants could kill an elephant if there were too many of them. The boss had to be defeated by a group of people. What should he do next? The best way was naturally to find the Empress and leave Tianjing Basin. However, it wasn't easy to find the Empress in Tianjing Basin. Even in a city, he would brush past her. Not to mention that he only knew the approximate area. Finding the Empress was like looking for a needle in a haystack, so it was better to follow the main force. Then what? The Empress and Lin Xiaola, along with him, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were burdens, faced countless experts. No matter how he thought about it, there wasn't much of a chance of victory. As for himself, he really couldn't help much. 4 Earthwill experts, conventional weapons weren't of much use, let alone Spiritwill experts. Nuclear bombs? Let's not talk about whether or not they could obtain those things. Even if they could, they would perish together. Poisonous gas? It seemed feasible. However, after thinking about it, he was an outsider and surrounded by experts. If he took out a bunch of bottles, it would definitely arouse suspicion. When that happened, he would be slapped to death. Furthermore, the speed at which the poison spread was too slow. Those experts were fast and had strong resistance to poison, so it was impossible for them to poison more than a few people. Using poison had the same problem as using nuclear bombs, which was that it was not easy to get their hands on such weapons of mass destruction. Apart from these, he could not think of any other method that would be useful in such a case. In this situation, there were not many weapons on Earth that could be of use. His last resort was to bring everyone back to Earth and hide for 5 days. He would wait for the Empress to kill a batch of them first. At the crucial moment, he would bring everyone back to Earth to recuperate for a few days before returning. However, it wasn't easy to grasp the timing. With so many experts fighting, the situation could change in an instant. He had to bring along the Empress, Qing Yuan, Hong Yuan and Lin Xiaola. One could well imagine the difficulty of this task. Forget it. Presumably, there was still some time before they could gather enough people to reach the target area. He would think about other methods during this period of time. Ren Baqian felt a headache coming on. He simply wanted to sigh. Your Majesty, didn't you stay in Gu City? Even if you wanted to come to Tianjing Basin, you should have brought more people with you. Ren Baqian turned his head and saw that Lin Xiaola was still gnawing on her lion head. It has been more than 2 days. Don't your cheeks hurt? However, Ren Baqian felt that her face was a little too big. Could this be the legendary gills? Lin Xiaola scratched people's faces for no reason. Ren Baqian really suspected that she was related to cats. If she was really a cat girl, then it would be logical for her to be tanned. When she was done gnawing, he would be able to see her bun-like face. They want to kill Her Majesty. Don't you have anything to say? Ren Baqian looked at her happily gnawing and couldn't help but ask. What? Lin Xiaola looked up in a daze. They want to kill Her Majesty. Why? Where? Who? Lin Xiaola's reaction was almost a replica of who she was, where she was, and what she was doing. Nothing, you can continue gnawing. Ren Baqian covered his head. That afternoon, Ren Baqian returned to Earth. At night, when the moon rose, the figure of the old village chief, Qingyun's sword, appeared outside the courtyard. Is Mr. Yi in? No. Lin Xiaola gnawed on the lion head while speaking vaguely. Where did Mr. Yi go? Qingyun's sword was a little puzzled. He should be in the room at this time. Lin Xiaola put down the lion head and tilted her head to think for a long time. In the past, Ren Baqian had told her how to deal with such a situation. What did he say again? After thinking for a long time, Lin Xiaola finally remembered something. Her voice was full of dissatisfaction and anger as she said, What time is it now? Do you have any civility to disturb me at such a late hour? Wait for me to go out and beat you to death. The last word, was extremely charming and full of twists and turns. In addition, when she was gnawing on the lion head, she mumbled something. Qingyun's sword's thoughts immediately went astray. I'm sorry, Mr. Yi, come to my room tomorrow when you wake up. Qingyun's sword said, flicked his sleeves and left quickly. After walking for more than 100 meters, Qingyun's sword looked up at the sky as if he was looking at his lost youth. The next morning, Ren Baqian came back with an arrow on his back. He was thinking that with so many people around, the Empress might not be able to see him. If he played pomp and circumstance, his voice would be very recognizable. Needless to say, the Empress would know where he was. In addition, there was a pile of fortified smoke bombs. The main thing was that he didn't know what to bring. After thinking about it, he thought that this thing might come in handy, so he prepared some first. When he came back, he looked at Lin Xiaola and felt that her face seemed to have grown a little bigger. Soon after, he opened the door, sat in front of the room, and tuned the strings. Then he played pomp and circumstance. After a series of short notes, the moans of the arrow reached everyone's ears. Damn it, what's that sound? Xiao Tianquan, who was wiping his weapon in the room, cursed. Why does this sound so weird? Who's playing this instrument? I want to slap him to death. A series of curses sounded within the range of Ren Baqian's arrow. However, there was still someone squatting in front of Ren Baqian, holding her face with both hands, and listening attentively. After Ren Baqian finished playing pomp and circumstance, he immediately felt refreshed. Sure enough, I'm an arrow player who was held back by my studies. What's this? It's very nice. Zhang Kaixian squatted at the entrance of Ren Baqian's courtyard and said. Ren Baqian's spirits immediately rose. Thinking about how his Eru was suppressed in front of the palace, Renbachian always felt heartache. Now he finally had a soulmate. Can you teach me? Zhang Kaixian asked again. Sure. Renbachian nodded and agreed without hesitation. Renbachian now felt that this little girl in front of him was becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. A soulmate was hard to find. Chapter 452. There were more than 10 households in Pingfeng Valley. Smoke rose from the chimneys at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. An old woman with a walking stick and a young girl stood at the entrance of the valley for a long time before slowly walking down. Master, is the person who lives here very powerful? The young girl wanted to help the old woman, but she was stopped by the old woman. It's fine at home, but don't do this outside. I'm not so old that I can't walk, the old woman replied. Then he answered, if it weren't for the continuous battles that damaged his foundation, I'm afraid he would have already attained the spirit will level. With his talent, how could he be stuck at the earth will level without any progress? As he spoke, he seemed to see that shy youth who always carried a paper umbrella on his back and had dimples when he smiled. At that time, she was around 20 years old and was in her prime. Unfortunately, fate made fools of people. So powerful. The young girl stuck out her tongue. There were only 13 spirit will experts in the entire Tianjing basin. This person must have been a famous person back then. The old woman walked very slowly as if she was admiring the scenery on both sides and adjusting her mood. Following a small path, they walked for a full hour before they reached the entrance of the village. When the children saw strangers, they looked at them curiously before dispersing. Only a naked boy with a ponytail and a runny nose was left. He ran up to the two of them, wiped his nose with his dirty fingers and asked, Who are you looking for? Who are you looking for? Does Changtian live here? The old woman asked with a smile. There's no such person, the child replied after thinking for a while. Oh. The old woman nodded and walked forward. I already said that there's no such person. What else do you want? The child asked curiously as he followed the two of them. He raised his hand and wanted to grab the young girl's clothes. The material of the clothes wasn't what the villagers wore, but he hesitated. When the young girl saw his actions, she quickly moved to the other side of the old woman. If she was grabbed by his runny hand, she would lose her clothes. As long as he's not dead, he's here. Even if he's dead, I want to see his grave. The old woman replied first, then turned to the young girl beside her and asked, Are you going to sell me out so quickly? Master, I was wrong. The young girl quickly lowered her head and turned to the other side of the old woman. A hand covered in snot suddenly grabbed the hem of her skirt, causing her face to twitch. She looked like she was about to cry. So soft. The child touched the skirt enviously, then quickly ran into the village. Run, Grandpa Chong. An old monster is coming to take you away. The old woman's firm footsteps suddenly came to a halt, and a sullen expression appeared on her face. However, it quickly dissipated and was replaced by a light and joyful feeling in his heart. He was indeed still here. A moment later, she stopped in front of a door and saw an old man sitting in the courtyard, pasting paper on an umbrella. The old man looked to be in his 60s. His white hair was combed behind his head. He was concentrating on the work at hand. When he finished, he put the umbrella aside and looked up at the old woman with a smile. Long time no see. Dozens of years, countless thoughts, and in the end, it all turned into a single sentence. Long time no see. You've broken through? The old woman's face lit up with joy. Yes, I originally wanted to repair my foundation, but no matter how much effort I put in, it was all in vain. Eventually, I gave up and worked here every day to feel everything around me. I didn't expect to break through. Life is still unpredictable, Chang Tian said in a relaxed tone, completely ignoring how disheartened he was and how he gave up everything to come to this village. Good. You can live a few more years than me. Remember to visit me on my grave every year. I'm afraid of loneliness, the old woman said with a trembling voice and tears in her eyes. Okay, Chang Tian replied with a simple word. After the old woman passed away, he moved to her grave and guarded her every day so that she wouldn't be lonely. The old woman sized up everything in the courtyard as if she wanted to imprint the entire place where this old man had lived for decades in her heart. She sorted out her emotions and said, "This time, I'm here to invite you out of the mountain." "I'm not interested in those things anymore," Chang Tian replied faintly. "The Empress of Dayou, the fifth most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao. She's currently in Tianjing Basin," the old woman said. Upon hearing this, Chang Tian's expression finally changed, and the faint smile on his face disappeared. "How many people?" "There's only her and 2 servants who are merely at the peak of the man-will level. Who else is going to make a move?" "Including your 17 spirit wheel experts and all the earth wheel experts in Tianjing Basin." The young girl beside the old woman turned to look at her master with her mouth wide open. Weren't there only 13 famous spirit wheel experts in Tianjing Basin? Including the people in front of him, there were only 14. "Good. After I finish pasting this umbrella, I'll follow you down the mountain. This umbrella is what I promised, and I can't make half of it." As the old man spoke, he held the paper umbrella in his hand again. Even if he had let go of everything, there were still some things that he couldn't let go. It wasn't for himself, but for the millions of people in Tianjing Basin. One day later, 3 figures stood at the entrance of the valley and turned to look back. More than 10 villagers were standing not far behind the 3 of them. They were holding a bundle in their hands. "Elder Chang, I've picked some mulberry seeds that you like to eat. I've packed them in this bundle for you to eat on the way. Also, I've packed the dough balls that I've made with Suzy leaves for you. Grandpa Chang, come back soon." The old man took a deep look at each and every one of them. He remembered all these simple villagers in his heart before taking the bundle and saying, "There's no need to send me off. I'm leaving and will be back soon." On Mount Qingniu, 5 figures strode down the mountain. 4 of them not only dressed the same, but even their appearances were exactly the same. The only differences were that one of them had a mole on the left corner of his mouth, another had a mole on the right corner of his mouth, one had a mole above his lip, and the last one had a mole below his lip. "Roar!" One of them roared, and the other 3 opened their mouths in unison. Their voices were so loud that they traveled dozens of kilometers. All the beasts on the mountain were frightened to the ground, and all the birds soared into the sky. "Ha ha ha ha. There will be a day when the 4 of us can make a move. Let's take a look at those old bastards and see how many of them are still alive." At the Golden Ring residence, Zhan Changkong, Painting Fairy, and the various attendants stood in front of the residence. At this moment, everyone was different from when Rinpochian first met them. Everyone was armed and overflowing with murderous intent. "Su Huan, after we leave, the residence will depend on you," Zhan Changkong said. "Chief, why don't I go while you and Madam stay behind?" A man in his 30s said. "Since we are going to do it, we have to do our best. This matter concerns everyone in Tianjing Basin, so how can we be afraid of death? Furthermore, with your talent, there is hope for you to enter the spirit wheel level in the future. Also, if Kaisian comes back, take good care of her." Painting Fairy's eyes were full of tenderness as she watched her husband give his instructions. In Wangbei City, the main door of the residence in the middle opened, and a dignified middle-aged man strode out. Behind him were more than 10 men and women wearing helmets and armor. In front of him was a cavalry of hundreds of people. The middle-aged man looked ahead, turned around and said, "Zai, come here." "Father." A valiant-looking young man strode forward. "If I don't come back, the North Alliance will be handed over to you," the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. The night before, he had already told his son about all the important people in the North Alliance, including who he could trust and who he couldn't. Regardless of who came back alive, his son would have a countermeasure. However, before they set off, he was still a little worried. "Father, you will definitely come back safely. I wish you a triumphant return," the young man said in a clear voice. "Haha, Qi Zixiao, the 5th most powerful expert in the world, who dares to say that they will come back alive?" The middle-aged man laughed. Then, he hesitated for a moment before slowly placing his hand on the young man's head and touching it. This was the first time he had touched the young man's head like this since he was 5 years old. "Father." The young man's eyes were a little red. "Sissy." The middle-aged man couldn't bear to see him like this and scolded. A few women wearing helmets and armor behind him immediately glared at him. Let's go, the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. The North Alliance. Many of the cavalrymen in front straightened their bodies and shouted. Southern Metropolis, Green Bellflower, Lingshan Sect, Mangsing Pavilion, Nine Blades Sect, Death Toad Sect. Whether they were famous or not, whether they were well-known sects in Tianjing Basin or gangs that were looked down upon by the people, whether they were the higher-ups of the three major powers or the elders living in seclusion in the mountains. They then glanced at Lin Xiaola and brushed past the two of them. Ren Baqian looked back and saw that the four of them were heading in the direction of the warlord's residence, which was now the headquarters of many experts. He had never seen these four people before, so they must be experts who had just arrived. With each passing day, the number of experts in the city would increase. The streets were very lively. Warriors with weapons could be seen from time to time, and all of them were metal weapons. Brother below, would you like to come up for a drink? Ren Baqian heard the shout above him and looked up. He saw a man leaning on the window of the second floor of a shop next to him, looking in his direction with a smile on his face. Ren Baqian looked to his left and right and heard the man shout, Brother from the Yun Nation, would you like to come up for a drink? Ren Baqian then confirmed that he was indeed called. He thought for a while and walked up to the second floor. This was a restaurant, and there weren't many people at this time. A young man in his 20s stood by the window on the second floor. He was very good-looking, gave off a sincere feeling when he smiled, and was dressed in embroidered clothes. He was the young man who called out to Ren Baqian just now. Seeing the two of them come up, he cupped his hands and said, Greetings, brother. Greetings, senior. You know me? Ren Baqian asked. Mr. Yi Yinxian. Or should I say, Principal Ren, would you like to sit down and have a chat? Ren Baqian's mind buzzed at the young man's words. An uncontrollable murderous intent emerged from the bottom of his heart as he coldly said, Kill him. It never crossed his mind that the other party was trying to trick him. This was because ordinary people would never imagine that the so-called guest from the Yun Nation would actually be the husband chosen by the Empress. Furthermore, the other party directly said that he would be the principal. It was obvious that the other party knew a lot of things. As soon as Ren Baqian finished speaking, she transformed into a gust of wind and pounced at the man by the window. Wait, it's not an enemy. The young man on the other side swayed a few times before flipping over and jumping out of the window. However, in less than 3 seconds, he crashed through the window with a claw mark on his face and fell back in. Without saying a word, Ren Baqian took out his gun, raised his hand, and fired 3 shots at the other party's head. We're not enemies, let's work together. The young man shouted as he flipped over and dodged Ren Baqian's gun. Stop! Ren Baqian hesitated for a while, and finally spoke up. He wanted to hear what Ren Baqian had to say. Seeing that Lin Xiaola had returned to his side, the man heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, the young man wasn't as calm as before. His body was covered in wood shavings, his hair was disheveled, and his face was covered in claw marks. He was so close to getting his head smashed open by Lin Xiaola. The young man took a few deep breaths and threw an ingot of silver to the innkeeper, who ran over after hearing the noise as compensation. He then smiled bitterly and said, It's really dangerous to deal with Principal Ren. Your skills are not bad. Ren Baqian praised insincerely. Speaking of which, this person's skills weren't bad. The difference in strength between a spirit will expert and an earth will expert was like heaven and earth. Previously, when Ren Baqian was attacked in Lan City, the Earthwheel Guard commander was killed in an instant when the other party suddenly attacked and used a heaven-grade weapon. Although this was due to the sudden attack and the use of a heaven-grade weapon, Lin Xiaola was much more skilled than the assassin from before. Even a spirit will expert like Qing Yun's sword wasn't her match. It was already amazing that this young man could withstand at least 2 blows from her without dying. In addition, the other party wasn't even 30 years old. Presumably, among the younger generation, besides people like the Empress and Li Yuanzhu, he could be considered one of the best. The young man sat down at the table next to him, and Runbachian followed suit. After the other party took out a bottle and applied some medicinal powder to his face, the wound on his face began to heal quickly. However, the newly regenerated skin was still a little tender, and the scratch marks could still be seen. "Who are you?" Runbachian calmed down and asked faintly. "You should have heard that someone from Great Xia is also here." The young man laughed and didn't seem to be affected by the life and death experience just now. If it was someone else who almost lost their life just now, they wouldn't be able to calm down even if they wanted to cooperate with you. Just based on his temperament, he wasn't an ordinary person. "It's you." Runbachian was surprised. He didn't expect the other party to be sent by Great Xia and know his identity. However, he kept saying that he wanted to cooperate with him, and he didn't know what he meant. "Principal Run, you can call me Su Qing." "How did you recognize me?" Runbachian asked. This was what he wanted to know the most at the moment. "I've seen the 7th prince and happen to know that Principal Run and the 7th prince look exactly the same." The young man smiled. Runbachian suddenly realized that this was where the problem lay. "I didn't expect Principal Run to change your identity and become a citizen of the Yun Nation to infiltrate the headquarters of the Secret Alliance. I think it isn't a coincidence that the Empress of Dayo appeared here." Chapter 454. Runbachian. "Can I say that I'm here to do social research?" In the end, after he left Valley City, the plot took a drastic turn for the worse. It was completely different from what he had planned before he came here. God knows how it turned out to be like this. "What do you want to cooperate with?" Runbachian asked. "These people are finished. These days are the last glory of this place." Su Qing looked out of the window and sighed. "Actually, I was a little worried at first. I was worried that the Aboriginals would really be chased back into the mountains after being attacked from all sides. The Yun Nation, Tianjing Basin, the Chun Nation, and finally, Great Xia were going to be besieged by all the other nations. And the result was predictable. After all, the brains of the Aboriginals. You know, I don't think they can come up with a solution to this situation." Su Qing gave Runbachian a knowing look. "This scene may be what many people want to see, but it's not what I want to see. The Chun Nation has sent their troops." Runbachian immediately grasped some information from his words. "Probably in the next few days. Perhaps they have already sent out their troops." Su Qing did not hide it. There was no need to hide this kind of news. As long as Runbachian left Tianjing Basin, he would soon receive this news. "What do you want?" Runbachian asked. "I don't want Great Xia to have no enemies. Initially, when I saw this trap of yours, I should be happy that a smart person has appeared in the ancient race. However, I soon got worried again. If you guys were to settle everything too quickly, Great Xia might shrink back after realizing that it was impossible. That's something I don't want to see either," Su Qing said. Runbachian immediately understood Su Qing's words. What he meant was that he hoped to see Great Xia being dragged into a quagmire and unable to extricate itself. At the very least, they had to make Great Xia reorganize their troops for another battle after suffering a crushing defeat. Great Xia's resources and soldiers were almost depleted. If they wanted to regroup and fight again in a short period of time, they had to recruit a large number of soldiers. If there weren't enough conscripted soldiers, they might even have to recruit able-bodied men. Furthermore, it would be difficult for Great Xia to prepare enough resources for hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a short period of time. Hence, they would have to increase taxes. If there were places where the people had no way of making a living, and someone with the intention of raising their arms and calling for help, it was likely that a rebellion would immediately occur. If Great Xia defeated the Aboriginals, they would be able to bring back their army to quell the rebellion. However, if Great Xia were to once again fall into a quagmire, or even lose the war with the Aboriginals, their foundation would definitely be shaken. After thinking for a while, Runbachian thought about the problems that might arise if Great Xia were to send troops again. The crux of the matter was that the war between the Aboriginals and the other nations couldn't end in a short period of time. Otherwise, the Aboriginals would fall into a stalemate. Only then would Great Xia, who had just suffered a great defeat, make up their minds. As for taxes, the other party probably knew the situation in Great Xia better than him. Also, would the people have a hard time making a living? This wasn't a problem at all. As long as there were people on the same side in a certain city, and they had such thoughts, it was very easy to make a certain area become a place where the people had no way to make a living. Then, all that was left was to raise his arm and shout. Rinpoche felt that his theory wasn't entirely correct, but it was highly possible. He didn't ask if the other party wanted to rebel. Instead, he tapped his finger on the table a few times and asked, "What's in it for us?" "A weak Great Xia is safe for you," Su Qing said. "No, we don't need it. We don't care if Great Xia is strong or weak." Rinpoche shook his head. With him around, with the advancement of science and technology, it was conceivable that Dayo would become prosperous and powerful in the future. Why would he care about whether Great Xia was strong or not? In the next few years, a decade or even decades, it would put pressure on Dayo? Rinpoche then said with some contempt. Moreover, if it's just Great Xia alone, what kind of storm can it set off? It wasn't that he was looking down on anyone, but in terms of strength, the Aboriginals could beat 10 of them. "You underestimate the people of the world in Great Xia too much," Su Qing said. "Wu Shengho has been scheming for so many years. If it weren't for those messy things of yours, I'm afraid that the north of Dayo would have been lost." "You know a lot?" Rinpoche asked. Su Qing smiled and didn't answer this question. After all, many things that had been used on the battlefield couldn't be hidden from others. In fact, what he cared about the most wasn't the things that Rinpoche used on the battlefield. Instead, it was the ease with which the Aboriginal troops were mobilized in battle. This included the current battle in the northeast. The Aboriginal generals were able to command the troops with ease, respond extremely quickly, and their combat power had increased by more than 30%. This was something that Great Xia couldn't achieve. He guessed that there must be a reason for this. Although there was no evidence, he had some guesses. If you have any trump cards, then take them out. People die in war. If we drag Great Xia into this, we don't know how many people will die and how much resources will be wasted. This isn't something that can be easily erased. 100 million taels of silver within 3 years, Su Qing said straightforwardly. A year's income of Great Xia's treasury. Can you afford it? Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. 100 million taels of silver was definitely a huge figure. This was Dayo's income for more than 10 years. After deducting the expenses of various places, there was basically not much left from Dayo's annual income of a few million taels of silver. There were too many things that could be done with this amount of money. Even Rinpoche was a little tempted. Even though he had already made up his mind to seize the entire Yun nation, his goal was to make the Yun nation part of his territory. He definitely couldn't do too much in the Yun nation, and the money that he would get in the end might not be much more than this sum of money. The aristocratic families of Great Xia are still very wealthy. I will get them to fork out this sum of money, but it will take some time for Great Xia to be in chaos. Su Qing smiled confidently. Rinpoche somewhat appreciated this kind of thinking of, I don't have it, but I can seize it. In addition, you still have to help me do 3 things, Rinpoche said. The rest were all fake and were things to be done in the future. With this snitch, it would be easier for him to get through this safely. Speak. First, help me send a letter to the Protectorate of Gu City within 2 days. I think you should have people in Gu City, and you should also have some means of communication, Rinpoche said. Shiwanya should be on his way, right? However, I can do this. After delivering the letter, my people will withdraw from Gu City. Su Qing smiled. Rinpoche was relieved to see that Su Qing had agreed. In fact, 2 days after knowing that the Empress had come to Tianjing Basin, he had thought of the radio station. However, what made him want to smash the wall was that the radio station was completely unusable. At first, he thought that it was due to the magnetic field of Mount Tianyan, but on the way here from Mount Tianyan, the radio station still couldn't be used. No matter which channel it was tuned to, there was only a bunch of ear-piercing noise. This made Rinpoche suspect that there was a problem with the ionosphere above Tianjing Basin, and he had no choice but to give up on using the radio station. This wasn't his fault. but the world's. Lin Qiaola was also unreliable. Now that he had Su Qing's help to pass the message, the biggest problem was finally solved. At the very least, in the worst-case scenario, he wouldn't find more than a dozen spirit wheel experts playing mahjong in a circle when he returned to Earth with the Empress. I will tell you the other two things in a few days, Rinpoche said. I have to do it. I won't make things difficult for you. Rinpoche smiled. It had to be said that these remnant citizens of the Han nation were really unlucky. Of the two foreign aid, one was an undercover agent, and the other was a snitch. Anyone who knew about this situation would vomit blood. Tell me, other than the muscles in your brain, is there anything else that is presentable? You can't even find the way to the inn, and you made me walk such a long distance. A crisp voice said. You can't find the inn either, right? Another coarse voice retorted. Ha! Do you believe that I will shoot you into the wall? The voices on the street made Rinpoche's ears twitch. Was this the little Lolita? Why were they here? Chapter 455. Rinpoche craned his neck to take a look. Sure enough, it was little Lolita. She was holding some local snacks in her hand, and beside her was a tall and well-built student. The two of them stood together. Just by looking at their backs, one would think that they were father and daughter. If there's any news, remember to inform me, Rinpoche said. They don't trust me very much either. After all, you and I are outsiders. In fact, now that things have come to this point, you don't need to worry about anything. Su Qing smiled. Rinpoche felt that he had a lot to worry about. Whatever the other party thought he didn't have to worry about, he had to worry about. Both sides received unequal information to begin with. I'll have someone deliver the letter to you later. As for the other two matters, I'll let you know when the time comes. Within a short period of time, the rebellion in Tianjing Basin won't stop. Rinpoche nodded at him, got up and left with Lin Qiaola. From beginning to end his expression was very calm, as if he had a card up his sleeve. No matter what, he had to put on a show. He couldn't let the other party see through him. He was the only one who knew how worried he was before he came to this building. After he left, Su Qing sat there and laughed. He poured himself a glass of wine and took a sip. Great Xia was already rotten and should have been overthrown long ago. Everything that was taken away should be returned. It was a pleasant surprise to be able to meet Qi Zixiao's husband. The biggest reason why he said everything so clearly was because he wasn't afraid that the other party would find out. So what if the aboriginals knew that Great Xia was going to fall into chaos? The current land in Deyo was more than enough for the barbarians to wreak havoc. Even if Great Xia were to fall into chaos, the aboriginals would at most take advantage of the situation and leave. How could they stay in Great Xia and not leave? Those barbarians didn't have that many people to manage the place. If their territory was too big, they would be stuffed to death. Furthermore, Great Xia wasn't Tianjing Basin, and Qi Zixia wasn't #1 in the world. When there was a war or a change of dynasty, those experts would not make a move. If the aboriginals entered Great Xia's territory and didn't want to leave, someone would naturally show up. He believed that 100 million taels of silver would be enough to tempt the other party. The aboriginals wouldn't be able to accumulate such wealth even if they gave it to them for 100 years. These people are dead. Su Qing poured himself a cup and drank by himself. His gaze followed the window and looked in the direction of the city lord's mansion. He thought to himself, then smiled. What did these people have to do with him? Rinpoche went downstairs and whispered to Lin Qiaola. I saw Tonglan just ahead. Go and find them, but don't alarm them. Come back and tell me. Why do I feel like I'm getting busier and busier? Lin Qiaola said with some dissatisfaction. Lin Qiaola knew who Tonglan was. After all, they had gone to the salt well previously and traveled all the way here this time. Even though Tonglan was sleeping most of the time, she still remembered the youngest girl. Rinpoche cast a sidelong glance at her and asked, Where did you get the courage to say this? Without waiting for her to refute, he urged, I'll give you 3 more pieces of candy. Hurry up and go. Lin Qiaola bared her teeth at him, and in a flash, she landed on the roof of a nearby building. She widened her eyes and searched through the crowd moving forward. Renbaqian stretched his body. Now he could finally relax. Originally, he was still worried that even if he brought the Empress to Earth during a crisis, they would still be surrounded when they returned. That would be troublesome. After all, the other party wouldn't give up so easily. Under the circumstances where there was no other way, they might just wait there. As long as he informed Shiwanya, he didn't need to worry about the following matters. Perhaps their so-called encirclement and suppression of the Empress would really turn into a complete wipeout. If that happened, it would become a trap set by him and the Empress, waiting for those idiots to fall into it. Regardless of whether the truth was true or not, what he said was true. Walking on the street, he wasn't feeling restless anymore. His waist wasn't sore, and his legs weren't hurting anymore. He looked at the shops on both sides of the street with great interest, as well as the pedestrians coming and going. Not long after, Lin Xiaola returned to Renbaqian's side and said, "Found them." Following her guidance, Renbaqian saw Tonglan in the crowd. That girl was still bickering with the student beside her about the location of the inn. Renbaqian didn't approach the two of them. He found a shop along the way, borrowed a pen and paper, and wrote some simplified Chinese characters on it. Then he crumpled the paper into a ball and handed it to Lin Xiaola. When the two of them turned into a secluded alley and were about to change to another street, Renbaqian threw the paper at Tonglan. Tonglan reacted very quickly. She immediately leaped into the air, turned around, and saw that the person who threw the paper was Lin Xiaola, who was standing on a roof in the distance. "It's her?" Tonglan was surprised. "Who?" the other student asked. "The bedwarmer by Yague's side." Lin Xiaola curled her lips and said, "Yague must be nearby." What does bed warming mean? Tonglan fell into deep thought. This is a good question. The weather is already hot, so wouldn't it be even hotter if someone warms the bed? I will go back and ask Grandpa. She then picked up the paper and said, "It seems like it's for us. There will be major changes. Think of a way to inform the other four groups to quickly leave Tianjing Basin. Don't pass through cities and towns. Choose the wilderness." Inscription: Your grandfather will always be your grandfather, and your teacher will always be your teacher. Damn that Yague. Tonglan gritted her teeth and cursed after reading the inscription. In fact, with the simplified Chinese characters and the fact that she had seen Lin Xiaola before, she would have known who wrote it even if it wasn't inscribed. However, he had to add such an inscription that made her gnash her teeth. Major changes? These people are going to rebel? Another student subconsciously thought of this answer. After all, most of the students who came here were the children of officials. Even those who didn't know about the situation, now knew about the situation here. I'm afraid so. Let's go back and look for them first. Tonglan glared at him and said, It's all because your brain has nothing but muscles. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have gotten lost. It's all because they made the city too messy. It's not easy to find them. That student immediately found a scapegoat. Otherwise, he would have been nagged at by this little brat for a long time. Unfortunately, he couldn't beat her. After spending half a day, the two of them finally found the inn. At this time, the others had already gone back for a long time. The two of them called the others into the room and showed the note to them. How can we just run away when they are rebelling? Won't we be laughed at when we go back? Why don't we kill their warlord? That's a good idea. Many people were tempted. It was difficult for them to make contributions on the battlefield with their strength, but now, there was a great contribution in front of them. They also have experts. You guys aren't even enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Since Yague has said so, let's leave first. The other groups still don't know about this matter. Finally, a rational person spoke up. Chapter 456. That night, Renbaqian sealed the letter with wax and sent it to Su Qing after finding out where he lived. Over the next few days, Renbaqian saw waves of experts from all over Ming City. On this day, the people from the North Alliance arrived. The leader of the Northern Alliance, Typhon, arrived at the scene with a dozen armored generals and hundreds of knights. Tai Feng was a spirit wheel expert, and he wasn't a weakling. The dozens of generals were all earth wheel experts, and the hundreds of knights were all man wheel experts. This wasn't the strength of the entire North Alliance, but the strength of Wangbei City. This city alone was stronger than the Golden Ring residence, one of the 8 major sections. This showed the strength of the North Alliance. Tai Feng hadn't been in the city for long when the Northern Alliance's experts began to gather. They were the most powerful force in the city. The chief of the North Alliance, Tai Feng, is inviting me to a banquet? Ren Baqian looked at the invitation in his hand and was slightly surprised. He knew that Tai Feng had entered the city and even took a look at him from the entrance. He didn't expect that he would be invited to a banquet the night he entered the city. Should I go? Ren Baqian read the invitation again and pondered for a while. To be honest, he didn't have any intention of building a good relationship with these people. There was no need. However, it was good to go and see the experts from all over the world. At least, he would be able to know some of them. In addition, he wanted to see if he could get any useful information. That night, he went to Tai Feng's banquet. He didn't get any useful information, but he did get to know some of the important people in the North Alliance. In addition, the dance of the group of naked girls that night had left a deep impression on him. Very deep. It was so deep that he even dreamed of a demonic dance at night. After waking up, Ren Baqian directly threw the underwear into the trash can without any intention of destroying the evidence. This kind of thing wasn't worth paying attention to in modern times. After thinking about it carefully, he hadn't touched a girl for a long time, and didn't know when he would be able to touch the Empress when he reached the earth will level. He was living the life of a monk with a pure heart and few desires. He didn't know if it was planned, but the first day the North Alliance arrived, and the second day the Southern Metropolis, one of the 3 major powers, also sent an invitation to Ren Baqian. After 2 consecutive nights of demonic dances, Ren Baqian felt as if weeds had grown in his heart. On the 3rd day, the green bellflower from the 3 major powers finally arrived. A group of female soldiers. Before the arrival of the green bellflower, Ren Baqian had great fantasies about this power with a beautiful name and a large number of women. After all, the name itself could confuse people greatly. However, when he saw the woman sitting on the back of an elephant with a waist circumference of 8 feet, and an arm-thick iron rod hanging beside the elephant, he was so scared that he almost fell off the wall. Just looking at the one in front was enough to make him lose interest in the people behind him. Fortunately, the female army of the green bellflower had no intention of hosting a banquet. Otherwise, Ren Baqian would have to rack his brains to think of a way to reject them without incurring a grudge. He was not afraid of offending people, but he did not want to be stared at during this period of time. In the past 3 days, apart from the 3 great powers, there were also sects of various sizes, including 7 of the 8 great sections. He even met the famous Mengsing Pavilion in Tianjing Basin. They arrived at the same time as the green bellflower, but they entered the city later than the green bellflower. Compared to the undeserving reputation of the green bellflower, Ren Baqian had to admit that the Mengsing Pavilion lived up to its name. Not to mention the experts dispatched by the Mengsing Pavilion. The dozen or so disciples accompanying them could be considered heavenly beauties. In particular, with more than a dozen cold-looking beauties going together, the quantitative change caused a qualitative change that really made people unable to take their eyes off them. When the green bellflower and the Mengsing Pavilion arrived, Qingyun's sword gathered everyone together for the first time. The venue was the warlord's residence. There were many people who came. Not only were there big and small powers, but there were also those senior experts who lived in seclusion. Even if only the main figures from the big and small powers went, including those experts who lived in seclusion, there were still 200 to 300 people. At the appointed time, Ren Baqian and Lin Xiaola met Su Qing, and an old man at the gate of the warlord's residence. Both parties looked at each other with a tacit understanding in their eyes. Mr. Yi, after talking to you the last time, I was suddenly enlightened. You have dabbled in astronomy and geography, and I really admire you. I can't wait to have a detailed discussion with you. Su Qing smiled and greeted him loudly. Ren Baqian was stunned. What was going on? Could it be that they were going to flatter each other? Rinpoche immediately replied, "You flatter me. I also yearn for your affairs in the brothel. In particular, I yearn for the Bingdi lotus and the 4 blooming flowers." This time, it was Su Qing's turn to be stunned. What was going on? What happened to flattering each other? I boasted that you have dabbled in astronomy and geography, but you said that I have affairs in the brothel? This doesn't seem to be right. Su Qing looked around and saw that the people from the Manxing pavilion who had just entered were looking at him with disdain. There was nothing wrong with going to the brothel and showing off to the men, but it was more disgusting for the women. Su Qing laughed and said, "Mr. Yi, you must be joking with me." "Haha, of course." Su Qing then winked at him, and both of them walked in side by side without saying much. There were too many experts around, and even a whisper couldn't be concealed. After entering the warlord's residence, they saw a circle of tables in the courtyard. At the front were the seats for the major powers, and Rinpoche and Su Qing each had a table. Behind them were the sects and experts who lived in seclusion, and the leaders of some small powers. As the two of them found their seats and sat down under the guidance of the attendants, there was still a steady stream of people coming in. Rinpoche felt that this was a martial arts conference. However, the purpose wasn't to elect the chief, but to suppress the devil who had brought disaster to the martial arts world. Well, that's right. That devil was his fiancée. The courtyard was bustling with voices, and all kinds of greetings and attempts to establish relationships filled everyone's ears. Rinpoche turned to look at Lin Xiaola, and saw that she was almost banging her head on the table. Fortunately, this chaos didn't last long. Qing Yun's sword stood at the front and pressed his hands on the table. "Everyone, please be quiet." His voice was heard throughout the hall. The courtyard immediately quieted down. "This is the most complete gathering we have ever had. It's truly a grand occasion." Qing Yun's sword sighed with emotion. The 3 major powers, the sects, and the sects and experts who lived in seclusion were gathered together. Even 70 years ago, there wasn't such a scene. After all, after a series of wars, more than half of the experts had withered. I'm sure everyone knows the reason for gathering all of you here today. The 5th most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao, the Empress of Dayo, is currently in Tianjing Basin. This is our chance, our best chance. If we seize this opportunity, our descendants will no longer be trapped in this cage, and will be able to soar freely in the vast sky. I won't say any more nonsense. Some of you here can see that day and some won't. Including me, no one knows if they will survive this battle. However, everyone still came here without hesitation for the same goal. For everyone in Tianjing Basin and for our descendants, what we see isn't just this vast sky. Qing Yun's sword said as he pointed to the top of his head. Everyone felt the same way. Qing Yun's sword's words resonated with everyone's hearts. Qi Zixiao was very strong. She was so strong that no one here was a match for her in a one-on-one fight. Even if many of them fought together, they still wouldn't be a match for her. However, some things had to be done by someone. Where there was blood, there had to be people. Many of them had already made arrangements for their funeral, and some had even prepared coffins. Among them, there was good and evil. There were experts who were well known in Tianjing Basin, and there were also hermits who mingled in the streets. They might not be able to see the future, but they wanted to fight for a future for the people of Tianjing Basin. This was the roar of all of them after being imprisoned for 70 years. It was their resistance. "Where is she?" someone shouted with a murderous aura. "Where is she? Kill her. Kill her and kill our way out. Kill our way out." Following Qing Yun's sword speech, everyone was boiling with murderous intent. "She's waiting for us." Qing Yun's sword's words made everyone quiet down. Rinpoche frowned slightly. "She's 400 kilometers away from here, and hasn't moved for 3 days. She sensed us and is waiting for us," Qing Yun's sword said in a deep voice. "I don't know if we should say that she's arrogant and underestimates us, or that she's arrogant and has too much confidence in herself. I originally wanted to surround her after gathering everyone, but I didn't expect her to simply stop and wait for us there." Hearing this, Rinpoche sighed in his heart. "Your Majesty, you should be more careful. Not far away, Su Qing glanced at Rinpochian. This was the preparation to pull in the net. However, he didn't see the complacent look on Rinpochian's face. Instead, he looked bitter and hateful. Chapter 457. After that, Rinpochian focused half of his attention on listening to Qingyun Sword's arrangements and the other half on thinking. He occasionally turned his head to look at Lin Xiaola, who was sleeping soundly with her head propped on the table. Her saliva was dripping from her mouth and forming a large pool on the ground. Rinpochian felt that she might need to sew her mouth shut. She looked like a pretty girl, but why was she drooling every day? Qingyun Sword was still making arrangements at the front. After all, they weren't going to surround and kill the Empress. That wouldn't be very effective. Qingyun Sword divided the Earth Wheel experts into 11 groups and divided them into inner and outer formations. This way, they could maximize everyone's strength and reduce casualties. However, they only had 3 days to practice these formations. By then, everyone's level of cooperation would determine the power of these two formations. Fortunately, everyone was an Earth Wheel expert, and their reactions were much stronger than ordinary people and man-wheel experts. Even if time was tight, they should be able to practice the formations to a certain standard. Everyone discussed until it was very late before they left. Rinpochian returned to his residence, wrote a letter, and then looked for Su Qing. He finally realized that the mutual flattery in front of the warlord's residence was very useful. At least it gave the two of them a reasonable excuse to meet so late at night. My men have already left Gu City. After all, their identities have been exposed, and there is no value in staying there. Su Qing wasn't surprised by Rinpochian's arrival, but he was surprised by his request. After all, Rinpochian had already sent a letter back, and he didn't expect him to send a second one. In his opinion, since he had already set up a trap, he just had to wait for these people to step into it. He didn't understand why Rinpochian was so anxious to send a second letter. Unless they didn't make any arrangements? As soon as this idea popped up in his mind, he dispelled it. Qi Zixiao's appearance here had attracted everyone's attention, and Rinpochian's appearance among these people was already a very obvious trap. It was impossible for there to be any mistakes in the arrangements. In fact, even if there were mistakes, it didn't matter. With Qi Zixiao's strength and the protectorate of the north led by Xiwanya, as long as these people gathered together and attacked, they would be able to eliminate more than half of them. The remaining people wouldn't be able to cause much trouble. The second condition. Rinpochian stretched out 2 fingers while Su Qing was thinking. Su Qing looked at him and laughed. He stretched out 2 slender fingers and took the letter from Rinpochian's hand. Do you want to stay and chat about the affairs of a brothel? He waved his hand and left. What was the point of listening to others talk about brothels? I'll go there myself when I get back, but I'll have to find Tongjinya to take the blame. For the next few days, everyone was pulled out of the city to practice the array formation. At the same time, they were waiting for the few people who hadn't arrived yet. Most importantly, there were 2 spirit will experts among them. Rinpochian hoped that these days would continue. According to the time, Xiwanya should have already set off with his men. Rinpochian didn't know if the second letter had reached him. The second letter contained the Empress's location. If the Empress was really waiting, the siege should be taking place in the vicinity of that city. However, things didn't go as Rinpochian wished. 3 days later in the evening, Rinpochian received a notice to set off the next morning. Rinpochian calculated the time and realized that it should be 5 to 6 days before Xiwanya received the letter. Even if he left immediately, it would only be 5 days. Rinpochian had walked for about 20 days from Gu City to this place. However, he traveled in an ox cart and took a long detour. If he rode at full speed and took into account that the mounts needed to rest, it would take at least 10 days to reach the Empress's location from Gu City. This meant that Xiwanya wouldn't be able to catch up no matter what. If everything went well, he should be able to see Xiwanya when he brought the Empress back to Earth. Another thing that Rinpochian wasn't sure about was how many spirit will experts would survive the fight with the Empress and face Xiwanya. If there were too many, he was afraid that Xiwanya would be sending himself to die. Rinpoche calculated in his heart. There were too many variables, and he couldn't calculate them clearly. He could only take it one step at a time. That night, Ming City was much quieter. They would set off the next day and would arrive in 2 days at most. Everyone took this time to adjust their state of mind, or check their weapons. Even Rinpoche had checked the fortified smoke grenades to see if they would be able to contribute to the war. At least, according to Rinpoche's estimation, these people's formations wouldn't work. The important thing in this batch of fortified smoke bombs wasn't the smoke itself, but the substance added to the smoke bombs. The smoke was a complementary product. What was added to the smoke bombs was concentrated skunk musk. This was the secretion of skunk. It was said that the moment one was sprayed with the skunk liquid, it felt as if someone had smashed the back of their head with a baseball bat. Then a pair of big hands twisted their lungs into a ball, and they couldn't breathe at all. Needless to say, it was painful to the eyes. She immediately burst into tears and could even make people faint. This wasn't just an attack on the sense of smell, but also touch, sight, taste, sixth sense, and seventh sense. Furthermore, this smell would linger on the body for about a week, even if it was carefully cleaned. This smell was indescribable. The difference between stinky tofu and this thing was probably the difference between Leifeng and Leifeng pagoda. The substance added to Rinpoche's smoke bombs was said to be 2 to 3 times stronger than skunk musk. It was enough to make people doubt their lives and doubt that being alive was a mistake. Under the circumstances where weapons of mass destruction couldn't be used, Rinpoche felt that this thing might be the most effective. Of course, in a certain aspect, this thing could also be said to be a type of biological weapon of mass destruction. However, this thing also had a lot of shortcomings. The biggest one was probably that using this thing was equivalent to perishing together. After all, if this thing was thrown out, even if it was thrown in the surroundings, he and the Empress would probably be enveloped by that terrifying smell. Rinpoche didn't dare to imagine the Empress's expression at that time. It would definitely be very interesting. After thinking about it, Rinpoche shivered and immediately encouraged himself. If possible, he didn't want to use this type of biological weapon of mass destruction. However, in order to save people, he had no other choice. This is life. Rinpoche sighed, turned his head and glanced at Lin Xiaola, who was leaning against the headboard. If he remembered correctly, this girl's sense of smell seemed to be much better than his. Lin Xiaola suddenly quivered in her sleep, looked at Rinpoche with sleepy eyes and asked, "What happened?" "Nothing, continue to sleep." Rinpoche waved his hand. The night passed. The next day everyone set off. Chapter 458. In an inn in Wu City. "Miss, are you leaving today?" Qing Yuan opened the window, and Hong Yuan brought the Empress a basin to wash up. "No," the Empress replied faintly. In her mouth was a toothbrush that she brought back from Earth, which was much more comfortable to use than a tree branch. In the eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, a small toothbrush was very luxurious. At least, other people, including the ministers of the imperial court, used a tree branch to clean their mouths. "Is there anything here that Miss is concerned about?" Qing Yuan asked softly. The Empress usually stayed in the previous cities for 1 or 2 days before leaving. However, she had stayed here for 7 days, which puzzled the two of them. "I have seen what I wanted to see, and it's about time," the Empress said after washing up. "What time?" "If the remnant citizens are going to make any moves, they should be here in a few days." "I thought they would come a few days ago," the Empress said. In fact, after leaving Longzhou City, she found that there were people paying special attention to her in every city. Some of them were street vendors, some were passers-by, and some were city guards. Since then, she knew that she was being followed. She originally thought that she would see some people soon, but unexpectedly, it was very calm. Under the calmness, an even more turbulent undercurrent was brewing. The Empress wanted to see the experts among the remnant citizens, see what they would say to her, and see what tricks they had up their sleeves. In addition, she didn't know if that guy knew that she was here. Many people in Tianjing Basin should know, and he should be aware of it, right? If he still didn't know, she should hang him on the city wall and whip him every day. After washing up, the Empress wasn't in the mood to go out. Standing in front of the window, she could see a tall mountain in the distance, which should be a good place to bury people. Those so-called experts in Tianjin Basin should be satisfied to be buried there. After standing in front of the window for a long time, the Empress turned to the two of them and said, "Play cards with me." "I'll go get it. Sister Hongwuan, you play." Qing Yuan rolled her eyes and scurried out of the room. They weren't principal run, and didn't dare to win when playing cards with the Empress. Even if they won, they didn't dare to stick a note. It was better to watch from the side. The Empress played from morning to afternoon and plastered Hongwuan like a mummy. Finally, she sat on the bed contentedly. Not long after, the Empress's eyes lit up. In a flash, she disappeared from the room and reappeared on the roof. He looked around and saw 5 people standing on the surrounding rooftops. There were men and women, young and old. There was a silver-haired old man in a green robe, a beautiful middle-aged woman, and a dwarf who was only half the size of an ordinary person. The 5 of them just stood there without making any movements, but they had their own imposing manner. 5 spirit wheel experts. That's less than what I expected. I've waited for so long in vain. The Empress's cold voice could be heard clearly within a radius of a kilometer. Azure Cloud Sword Tong Kai. Naturally, it was the old village chief that Rinpochian had met before. At this moment he no longer had the image of an old hooligan. With a long sword on his back, a sharp sword aura surrounded his entire body, making him look like a heaven-piercing sword. Full Star Pavilion Shanro. The one who spoke was the beautiful middle-aged woman. Her eyes were like water as she smiled at the Empress. Unaffiliated person Lu Xiangdong. The one who spoke was the unusually small dwarf. Unaffiliated person Chang Tian. It was an old man in his 60s or 70s who held a paper umbrella in his hand. North Alliance's Typhoon. This was a middle-aged man with a broad build. The 5 of them bowed to the Empress. This was a show of respect for the strong. Only those who had reached their level would know how powerful the woman in front of them was. "Your Majesty, please forgive us for not being able to welcome you earlier. We arrived first and the other friends are still behind. We will definitely satisfy your Majesty," Qingyun's sword said in a clear voice. "North Alliance. I will kill you first." The Empress ignored Qingyun's sword's words and muttered the words North Alliance. Then, she spoke to Typhoon. North Alliance, Wangbei City. She had heard of this place because all of them, including Longsho City, were under the influence of the North Alliance. The name Wangbei was enough to explain everything. Typhoon wasn't angry or afraid. He laughed and said, "It's my honor to be remembered by your Majesty. Before coming here, I have already made arrangements for my funeral. My heart and soul are all focused on this battle. How much longer do you need to prepare?" The Empress looked at Qingyun's sword. It seemed like he had more authority among them. "We will arrive tomorrow night. The day after tomorrow will be fine," Qingyun's sword replied honestly. Since the Empress was waiting for them here, it had already explained everything. There was no need for him to hide anything. "The day after tomorrow, I will wait for all of you at Mount Wu and see what you are capable of," the Empress said faintly. Then, she disappeared from the roof and reappeared in a room. The 5 of them also disappeared from the roof. However, the streets were already in chaos. After all, they had spoken loudly just now and didn't intend to hide anything. No one knew the names of Qingyun's sword, Chang Tian, and Lu Xiangdong. However, the words North Alliance's Typhoon and Her Majesty were like a sledgehammer pounding on everyone's chest. The leader of the North Alliance, Typhoon, and the Empress of Deya were actually in Wu City. Furthermore, they were going to fight? This was a huge matter. In everyone's hearts, this was a battle. It was hard for ordinary people to imagine that the Empress could actually gather all the experts in Tianjin Basin just for one battle. Ordinary people were shocked when they heard the voice on the roof, but the innkeeper's legs were trembling. He had heard that cold voice before. After all, no one would easily forget such a beautiful lady. Thinking about the fact that there was such a deity living in the inn while he was completely ignorant, he had the thought of abandoning the inn and running back to his hometown to escape. That night, He packed up and ran away, preparing to return in a few days. After all, the aboriginal empress didn't have a good image in the hearts of the remnant citizens. The result of this incident was that the empress enjoyed the entire inn for a day and 2 nights. Other than the 3 of them, almost all the mice had run away. On the morning of the 3rd day, the empress got up and washed up. She sat in front of the table and said faintly, "Help me dress up." Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan helped the empress dress up for an hour. After the empress was satisfied with her reflection in the mirror, she stood up and put on a bright red coat. After going out, she ran to a faraway place to eat breakfast. The innkeeper and chefs had all run away, and even the shops on the street were closed. The empress had no choice but to run to a faraway place. After finishing breakfast, the empress strolled in the city as if nothing had happened. She seemed to be strolling leisurely, but every step she took covered a distance of several meters. It was as if the ground had shortened under her feet. After leaving the city, every step she took covered a distance of more than 10 meters. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan had to use all their strength to barely keep up with the empress's speed. At the same time, with every step she took, an imposing aura brewed and rose from her body. When she arrived at the foot of the mountain, the imposing aura from her body was already as heavy as the peak of a mountain. It was so heavy that it was difficult to reach. They could only look up and feel their own insignificance. Thousands of people stopped at the foot of Dark Mountain. When they sensed the mountain-like pressure coming from the woman in red, who was approaching them from afar, they all retreated to the sides like flowing water. Fear filled their eyes. These people were either the disciples of the various powers, or the guards of the 3 major powers. The empress acted as if she didn't see these people, and continued to walk forward. The people who were either standing or sitting on the mountainside also stood up and looked down the mountain. As the empress got closer and closer, everyone subconsciously made way for her to pass through. Renbaqian saw this scene from the crowd and repeated a sentence in his heart. It's worth it to have such prestige in one's life. The empress suddenly stopped in her tracks, turned her head, and looked at Renbaqian, who was in the crowd. Renbaqian smiled and gave her a thumbs up before quickly retracting it and lowering his head slightly. The empress was happy to see him, but she said coldly, "What are you doing here?" Everyone's head turned in Renbaqian's direction. Renbaqian felt like vomiting blood. Chapter 459. Renbaqian had made many assumptions about the beginning and process of this battle. In his mind, the story should start like this. The empress, dressed in red, stood alone on the peak of the mountain, looked down at the crowd and said, "All of you can come at me together." Then the empress would fight the crowd alone. When the crowd was no match for her, they would form a formation and he would throw dozens of fortified smoke grenades, causing the crowd to flee. He would make a great contribution and receive a kiss from the empress. Or in a crisis, he would bring the empress back to Earth to recuperate for a few days. When he returned, he would see Shiwanya's face. In short, the beginning and ending of the story should be like this. However, the beginning of the story was completely different from what Renbaqian had imagined. He worked hard to infiltrate the enemy's camp, and the empress sold him out with just one sentence. Renbaqian looked around. At present, no one was sure who the empress was talking to, but many people were already looking at him. If he shouted, "Your Majesty, it's great to see you. I miss you so much," would they beat him up? Would the empress be able to save him in time? Renbaqian felt that it was better to be more careful. Renbaqian sneered and said, "Humph, you didn't expect this, did you? You didn't expect to see me here, did you?" When everyone heard this, they realized that Yi Yunxian had met Qi Zixiao before, and had a feud. In that case, Yi Yunxian was much more powerful than they had imagined. What kind of person was able to become enemies with Qi Zixiao and survive? He definitely wasn't just an envoy from the Yin nation. Everyone looked at Renbaqian in a different light. Renbaqian stepped forward, and everyone made way for him, waiting to see the confrontation between him and the empress. The empress didn't expect Renbaqian to reply so coldly. She felt a pain in her heart, raised her eyebrows and looked at him coldly. Renbachian was only a few dozen meters away from the Empress. As he passed through the crowd, he was on tenterhooks. When he stood in front of the crowd, he immediately relaxed and put on a warm smile. You didn't expect me to wait for you here, right? I missed you so much. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, and then a pounce. Then the Empress dodged, gave him a princess hug, and threw him to the ground. Everyone around them was stunned. What was going on? His tone just now gave everyone the impression that the two of them knew each other, and that there was a deep hatred between them. However, in the blink of an eye, it was true that the two of them had gotten to know each other, but their deep hatred had turned into affection? The change in style was too fast, so fast that no one could react. Who are you? Someone immediately reacted and shouted. This person was definitely not someone from the Yun nation. It was impossible for the people of the Yun nation to be on Qi Zixiao's side. Renbachian turned his head and looked around. Everyone was looking at him, and many of them looked angry at being deceived. Although he hadn't been in the mood to make friends with these people, he had gotten to know quite a few people. There were people from the Golden Ring House, experts from the Northern Alliance, people from the Southern Metropolis, and people from other sections. At this moment, all of them were looking at him with confusion and anger. Sorry, I'm a police officer. Renbachian looked at the crowd. He didn't have a bad impression of many people here. Before he came into contact with it, the number of people who died was just a number. He never cared about such numbers, didn't care, and didn't think too much about it. But after coming into contact with them, each and every one of them had flesh and blood in his mind. He sighed and continued. You are bandits. I am an official. We are not the same people. But to be honest, all you want is to walk out of here. I came here for this purpose. You don't have to be so anxious. However, it was already too late to say this. All the experts in Tianjing Basin were here, and he couldn't possibly make them retreat obediently just by saying a few words. Therefore, he didn't want to waste his breath. Cut the crap. You're obviously not from the ancient race, yet you're Qi Zixiao's dog. That's a disgrace to our ancestors. Someone scolded from below, followed by a wave of curses. Seeing this, the Water Empress's gaze turned even colder. Her killing intent intensified as she memorized every single person who spoke up. He could scold them, but others couldn't. Whoever cursed, he would kill. I know who he is. Someone else said. You're the gigolo that Qi Zixiao found, right? Renbachian touched his face. His reputation had spread all the way here. Handsome is only on the surface. After interacting with me for a long time, you will realize that I'm more beautiful and handsome inside. Renbachian sighed. Who said you were handsome? Don't you have any shame? Are you doubting Her Majesty's judgment? Renbachian retorted. Everyone's anger and contempt were unmistakable. Everyone from the Golden Ring residence frowned and looked at their chief. Zhang Chongkong stroked his beard with a complicated look in his eyes. He didn't expect that he would personally send a spy to the hidden village. He was filled with regret, anger, and some other thoughts. He didn't know what exactly was going on in his mind. In any case, no one dared to spit in front of the two of them. After all, the Empress was standing beside Renbachian. Even if they came with the mentality of death, they couldn't ignore the Empress's status and strength. All of you, shut up. Qingyun's sword frowned as he looked at the farce below. We've made a fool of ourselves in front of your majesty, Qingyun's sword said. He then looked at Renbachian and said coldly, I really didn't expect this. I didn't expect it either, Renbachian replied. He really didn't expect to be among these people. I don't like people standing higher than me, the Empress said coldly. When Renbachian came over just now, the momentum that she had accumulated was interrupted and began to fall. As she took another step, her momentum rose again. The Empress walked all the way to a higher position than everyone else before looking down. Your Majesty, be careful, Renbachian said behind the Empress. Retreat to the back. I want to see what these people have up their sleeves, the Empress said coldly. There were more people than she had expected. She didn't expect so many people to come. The scene was huge, and there were a lot of people. Their target was her. This kind of scene made her even more eager to fight. 18 spirit will experts, not bad. These experts among the remnant citizens were also not bad. Tens of millions of people, all the experts among the remnant citizens were here, looking up at the Empress from below. This made the blood in the Empress's body boil. And there was a rumbling sound that sounded like a flood crashing into a river. In addition to her identity as the Empress, she was also a practitioner and the 5th most powerful expert in the world. The Aboriginal emperors were never the kind of emperors who didn't live in dangerous situations. Otherwise, why would the first emperor abandon everything and bring the experts into the mountains without any news of them? Why would the second emperor go out alone, return with serious injuries, and then disappear again? Being the Empress was a responsibility and identity, but not everything. The rumbling sound from the Empress's body caused the expressions of many spirit wheel experts to change. The blood in her body was agitated and emitted a sound like a torrent. To what extent had she cultivated her blood and chi? Renbachian stood behind the Empress and said in a different tone, "Your Majesty, why don't you let me play a song to strengthen your Majesty's prestige?" The Empress, who was about to erupt like a volcano, suddenly stopped. An ominous feeling arose in her heart. Renbachian turned around and took out the arrow with a face full of smiles. With such a big scene and so many listeners, this was his chance to perform. The Empress stood there alone, facing hundreds of experts. How could an ordinary person compare to such a mighty aura? How could an ordinary person be worthy of her? Chapter 460. At this moment, the Empress even had the thought of smacking Renbachian to death. According to her expectations, her aura should be at its peak at this moment. Regardless of whether it was her body or her mind, she should be in the best condition. However, she was interrupted twice by Renbachian. As a result, she was always a little short of perfect condition. However, Renbachian knew nothing about this mysterious matter, and was completely oblivious to it. He cheerfully found a place to sit down with the arrow in his hand, and held the bow in his left hand. This was what he had learned from his grandfather. His grandfather was left-handed, and although he wasn't, he was used to this posture when playing the arrow. Renbachian sat there, and pulled the bow twice to get a feel. Then, the strange notes of pomp and circumstance, and the moans of the arrow flowed out from his hands. The Empress immediately shivered. She was originally prepared to stand in place and let them make the first move, but now, she completely gave up on this idea. She silently turned into a red shadow, and pounced on one of the 18 spirit will experts below. Her extreme speed made her figure a red line in the eyes of many. Tai Feng from the North Alliance. The Empress said that she would kill him first, so she would definitely kill him first. Good timing. Tai Feng laughed heartily as a long saber appeared in his hand. The saber emitted a blazing heat that caused a heat current in the air. Clang. The Empress's body trembled slightly, but Tai Feng was sent flying like a cannonball. Tai Feng was good at charging and breaking through enemy lines. His strength wasn't weak among the spirit wheel experts, but he wasn't a match for the Empress in terms of strength. Umbrella. Chang Tian pointed from afar, and a paper umbrella that was about 30 meters long appeared in the air. Open. Chang Tian shouted again, and the giant umbrella in the air suddenly opened, covering a radius of about 30 meters. The Empress suddenly felt the sky darken as if the umbrella had covered half of it. Fall. Countless steel needles fell from the umbrella like a rainstorm. Those with good eyesight would be able to see that these weren't steel needles, but the ribs of the umbrella. Qin Yun's sword pointed with his finger, and the sword on his back was unsheathed with a clang. Dozens of sword gleams scattered in the air. A ribbon appeared in Shan Ro's hand. The front end of the ribbon, which was originally more than a meter long, kept extending forward as if it were alive. At the same time, the ribbon grew from 1 meter long to more than 10 meters long. Furthermore, it continued to extend forward and wrap around the Empress's feet. On the other hand, Lu Ludong's body transformed into a black shadow and moved in the mountains. His short stature was like that of an ape, and he reached the top of the Empress's head in no time. These 4 people were the fastest to react. After all, when the Empress said those words, they didn't feel that she was trying to intimidate them. With her status and strength, even though her words weren't the law, what she said was definitely what she was thinking. The Empress raised her hand and threw a punch at Lu Xiangdong, forcing him to retreat. Her fist didn't feel like it had made contact with a solid object. It was as if the dwarf flew along with the wind generated by her fist, landed somewhere not far away, and slid along the ground toward the Empress. After a few of them made their moves, the other spirit will experts followed suit. Someone was holding a fishing rod. Dozens of thin lines that were hard to detect shot out from the fishing rod and wrapped around the Empress. A chessboard appeared in someone's hand. With a slap of his palm on the chessboard, countless chess pieces shot toward the Empress. However, when the chess pieces were in the air, they turned into ferocious beasts. Out of the 18 people, 8 of them had condensed their heaven-grade weapons. Even though the other 10 were holding weapons that they were comfortable with, their speed and strength still couldn't be compared to that of an Earthwill expert. With 18 people attacking at the same time, the Empress seemed to be surrounded by all kinds of lights. Everyone could only hear the sounds of collisions in the light circle and couldn't see anything. Although it took a long time to describe, from the moment the Empress made her move to the moment everyone counterattacked, everything actually happened in a split second. Rinpochian had just played 8 short notes when a trembling moan drilled into everyone's mind. A series of moans rang out. That could be called 1,000 poses and 100 enchanting. That could be called 100 soul-stirring. That could shake one's heart and soul. Everyone's heart suddenly trembled. The Empress's sword fingers, which were shaped like a sword, slashed toward Lulu Dong, missed with a shake of the fishing rod in the old man's hand. Dozens of thin lines pierced the ground around the Empress with a piercing sound. The beasts formed by dozens of chess pieces had originally formed a flawless encirclement. However, 2 of the beasts suddenly slowed down and revealed a few flaws. The others were more or less affected by this series of moans. All of them wanted to turn their heads to look, but they resisted the urge. Their moves unconsciously slowed down by a little, and there were loopholes in their coordination with each other. When experts exchanged blows, there was a fine line of difference, let alone an expert like the Empress. She threw a few punches in succession at the spirit will expert who was holding the chessboard. After exchanging blows with him, she borrowed the momentum to pounce toward Qingyun's sword. While in the air, purplish red lines began to appear on the surface of her body. Her aura became stronger, and she pounced down with the force of the sky falling. Qingyun's sword felt the Empress firmly locking onto him. A huge force enveloped him as if he was facing an ancient giant beast, causing a great fear to rise in his heart. She's indeed the 5th most powerful expert in the world. Qingyun's sword roared in his heart. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood, breaking the pressure that the Empress had enveloped him. Then he used 2 of his fingers to form a sword and slowly drew it in the air. Following his fingers, Qingyun's sword, who was floating 1 meter above his head, turned into countless rays of light that surrounded the Empress as if they wanted to mince her into pieces. "Get lost!" the Empress shouted. Her hands flicked around her body, producing a clanging sound. Clang. It sounded like 2 swords colliding. Even though these rays of light couldn't mince her into pieces, she didn't want her clothes to be destroyed. The Empress turned half a circle in the air and stomped down. Qingyun's sword quickly drew a sword with his fingers, and a long sword appeared in front of him. The Empress stepped on the sword, and it turned into countless rays of light that flew in all directions. Qingyun's sword also spat out a mouthful of blood, and his feet sank 3 meters into the ground. When the Empress borrowed the momentum to soar into the air and pounced again, a paper umbrella appeared between her and Qingyun's sword. Then, everyone surrounded the Empress once again. However, at this time, there was always a sound that kept pouring into everyone's mind. The sound was like a crying beauty moaning under the bed. It wouldn't have been a big deal if that was the case, but this sound was strange and had never been heard before. It made people restless and unconsciously affected. The 5 senses of a practitioner were sharper than those of an ordinary person, let alone a spirit will expert. Let alone a spirit will expert who specialized in cultivating the spirit. Their control over their bodies was much weaker than the Empress's. and their spirits were greatly affected when they were stimulated. Shut up! A spirit will expert shouted angrily in Renbachian's direction. This damn sound was too disturbing. If it weren't for the fact that they were facing a formidable enemy, he would have turned around and chopped that guy up. Renbachian closed his mouth tightly and nodded with an aggrieved expression. Can't I just keep my mouth shut? Then he continued to play his arrow with satisfaction. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were worriedly looking at the battle below, but they couldn't see anything clearly. They couldn't help but look at Renbachian as the sound of the arrow made them clench their teeth and want to slap the person in front of them to the ground. As for the many earth wheel experts below, they couldn't help but plug their ears when they heard the sound of the arrow. It was so stimulating that it made their hearts beat faster and faster, making them want to kill someone. Bang! A figure flew out of the battle. It was a woman holding a pair of scissors. She spat out several mouthfuls of blood in the air, and the sound of her bones breaking could be heard. She had been disturbed by the sound of Renbachian's arrow just now, and a flaw appeared between her two moves. The Empress seized this opportunity to break her move and punch her body a dozen times in a row, breaking her bones. If the Empress hadn't said that she would kill Typhon first and held back a little bit, she would have been dead by now. Even so, it would be difficult to recover without a few years of recuperation, and there was no way for her to advance further. I'm here. Don't forget me, Your Majesty. Tai Yan, who had been punched down the mountain by the Empress just now, jumped up and shouted. Everyone immediately understood. Lu Xiangdong, Chang Tian, and Shan Rou moved closer to Tai Yan, ready to protect him at any time. Since Qi Zixiao had said so, she would only seriously injure him before killing him and not kill anyone else. This was the shackles that Qi Zixiao had placed on herself. Then, a few more sounds of the arrow reached everyone's ears, causing their hearts to skip a beat. If it wasn't for Qi Zixiao's ferocity, everyone would have smacked that fellow to death. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.